Your little experiment is worthless, my wife's dad, the boss, declared at a meeting. As he signed the papers, my phone buzzed. Quantum Tech patent approved. Bidding starts at $3.7 billion. I smiled. About that signature. So there I was, sitting at this ridiculously long mahogany table that probably cost more than most people's cars, trying not to let my sweaty palms leave marks on the polished surface. The whole setup screamed, Corporate Intimidation 101. You know, the kind of boardroom where dreams go to die and middle managers practice their soul-crushing speeches. My laptop sat open beside me like a faithful sidekick, filled with months of research that apparently nobody gave two shits about, and my carefully organized notes that I'd spent half the night perfecting, because, hey, I'm nothing if not prepared for my own execution. Henry Aldrich, my dear father-in-law and the CEO of Aldrich Dynamics, sat at the head of the table like some kind of corporate king, twirling his stupid Mont Blanc fountain pen with all the theatrical flair of a wannabe Shakespeare villain. God, I hated that pen. He bought it for $3,000 just to sign documents that ruined people's lives, and he treated it like Excalibur or some shit. The man had this whole routine down to a science. The dramatic pause, the condescending stare, the way he'd lean back in his leather throne and survey the room like he owned everyone's souls. Which, to be fair, he pretty much did. The boardroom was packed tighter than a subway car during rush hour. Directors in their identical gray suits sat around the table like a jury of corporate zombies, their faces showing about as much emotion as a dead fish. Henry's personal assistants hovered nearby, probably calculating how many zeros would be in their Christmas bonuses for witnessing this public humiliation. And then there was Claire, my loving wife, sitting there with that smug little smile plastered across her face like she'd just won the lottery. Her diamond earrings caught the fluorescent lights every time she moved her head, sending little sparkles dancing across the wall like a disco ball at a funeral. Those earrings, by the way, cost more than my entire lab setup. I knew because I'd bought them for our anniversary last year, back when I still thought she gave a damn about me or my work. Now they just served as a constant reminder of how naive I'd been, thinking that maybe, just maybe, the woman I married might actually support her husband's career instead of actively sabotaging it. Your little experiment is worthless, Henry declared, his voice booming across the room with all the subtlety of a freight train hitting a brick wall. He slid a stack of transfer documents across the table toward me, and I swear the papers made this ominous sliding sound, like the whisper of death itself. We're cutting our losses before this embarrassment costs us any more money. Claire's smirk widened, and I could practically hear her internal victory dance. She'd been waiting for this moment, like a vulture circling roadkill. Hell, she'd probably been planning it since the day I first pitched my quantum stability algorithm to the board 6 months ago. I remembered that day clearly, how she'd sat in the back of the room, filing her nails and rolling her eyes every time I got excited about a breakthrough. Real supportive wife material right there. Global Tech is offering $2 million, Henry continued, his tone suggesting he was doing me the favor of a lifetime. Which, frankly, is more than this nonsense deserves. You should be grateful someone's willing to pay anything for your. He paused, searching for the perfect insult, science fiction fantasies. $2 million. The man said it like he was announcing the cure for cancer. Meanwhile, the other directors nodded along like bobbleheads in a hurricane, probably relieved they wouldn't have to pretend to understand quantum physics anymore. I'd seen this routine before. Henry would make his dramatic pronouncement. Everyone would agree because disagreeing meant career suicide, and then they'd all go back to their offices to gossip about the crazy son-in-law who thought he was the next Einstein. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Once, then twice. I tried to ignore it because, you know, basic meeting etiquette and all that, but the damn thing kept going off like a car alarm. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Claire shot me a look that could have melted steel, probably thinking I was getting calls from creditors or something equally embarrassing. Henry's eye twitched. The man hated interruptions almost as much as he hated admitting he was wrong about anything. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Sorry, let me just. I pulled out my phone, expecting to see some spam about extending my car warranty, or maybe my mom asking if I'd eaten lunch. Instead, I saw a message from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. My heart near stopped beating. Patent approved. Breakthrough status. Initial bidding starts at $3.7 billion. I read it again. Then a third time. Billion. With a B. Not million. Billion. As in, enough money to buy a small country or fund NASA for a few years. I almost started laughing right there in the middle of Henry's big dramatic moment. The timing was so perfect it felt like divine intervention, like the universe had decided to play the ultimate practical joke on my asshole in-laws. I looked up at Henry, who was still holding his precious pen, having just signed his name to those transfer documents with a flourish that would have made John Hancock jealous. The man was practically glowing with self-satisfaction, probably already planning how he'd spin this story at the country club. Cleaned house today, he'd tell his golf buddies. Got rid of some dead weight. About that signature, I said calmly, sliding my phone across the polished table toward him. The device made this satisfying little skidding sound as it came to rest right in front of his shocked face. The silence that followed was absolutely golden. You could have heard a pin drop in that boardroom, if pins made sounds when they hit imported Italian marble floors. Henry's face went through about 17 different shades of confusion as he read the message, his eyes getting wider with each word. Claire leaned forward, squinting at the screen like she was trying to decode hieroglyphics. What? Henry started, but his voice cracked like a teenage boy asking someone to prom. 3.7 billion, I repeated, savoring each syllable like fine wine. Not million, Henry. Billion. With a B. You know, the number that comes after million? The one with 9 zeros instead of 6. And that, folks, was the moment Henry Aldrich realized he'd just signed away his company's claim to the biggest technological breakthrough of the century. His hand started shaking so hard that precious Montblanc pen of his clattered onto the table like a dead bug. The room went dead silent, and I mean cemetery at midnight silent. You could have heard a mouse fart in that boardroom. Claire's smug-ass smile didn't just disappear. It completely imploded, like a demolished building collapsing in on itself in slow motion. Her jaw dropped so far I was genuinely concerned she might dislocate something. And those expensive diamond earrings of hers stopped sparkling because she'd gone completely statue still. Henry's hand was shaking around that pretentious Montblanc pen like he was having some kind of corporate seizure, and his face had gone from its usual pompous red to a sickly shade of green that reminded me of expired milk. The directors around the table leaned forward like a pack of hungry wolves who'd just caught the scent of fresh meat. Their dead fish expressions had suddenly come alive with dollar signs practically glowing in their eyeballs. I could practically hear their brains doing the math. 3.7 billion split however many ways, minus taxes, plus bonuses, carry the one. These people could smell money from 3 states away, and right now the boardroom reeked of it. Not million, I said softly, letting the word hang in the air like a bad smell. Billion. I drew out that beautiful B word like I was savoring a perfectly aged whiskey. God, it felt good. I'd been waiting months to drop this bomb, and the explosion was even more spectacular than I'd imagined. Claire made this weird, choking sound, like she was trying to swallow her own tongue. She'd been mid-sip on her glass of wine, some overpriced French shit that probably cost more than most people make in a week. And now she was coughing and sputtering like she'd just inhaled liquid fire. Red wine splashed across her pristine white blouse, and I had to bite my lip to keep from grinning. That blouse probably cost $1,000, and now it looked like she'd been in a bar fight. That's impossible, Henry stammered, finally finding his voice. The great Henry Aldrich, CEO extraordinaire, master of the universe, sounding like a confused kindergartner who'd just learned that Santa Claus wasn't real. You can't. We own, the company funded. See? That's where you're wrong, Hank, I said, using the nickname I knew he absolutely despised. The man's eye twitched like he'd been electrocuted. Let me break this down for you in terms even a CEO can understand. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the moment. This was better than Christmas morning, better than winning the lottery, better than finding out your ex got fat and bald and works at a gas station. This was pure, undiluted justice served ice cold with a side of fuck you. The patent for my quantum stability algorithm, I began, speaking slowly like I was explaining quantum physics to a golden retriever, was registered under my name. My personal name. Not Aldrich Dynamics. Not the company. Me. David fucking Thompson. I rarely swore in professional settings, but this felt like the right time to make an exception. But the funding, Claire started, her voice cracking like thin ice. Ah yes, the funding, I interrupted, holding up one finger like a professor about to deliver a lecture. Every single cent that went into this project came from my grandmother's trust fund. You remember Grammy Thompson, right, Claire? The sweet old lady you said was charmingly quaint and probably senile? Well, turns out her quaint little nest egg was worth about $12 million, and she left every penny of it to me. Claire's face went white as fresh snow. She remembered those comments, all right. She'd made them at Grammy's funeral, thinking the old woman was just some broke retiree with a house full of cats and doilies. Turned out Grammy had been quietly investing in tech stocks since the 1960s and never mentioned her portfolio to anyone except her lawyer. I kept meticulous records, I continued, pulling a thick manila folder from my briefcase. Every receipt, every invoice, every payment. My lawyer's been documenting everything for the past 18 months. Not one red cent of Aldrich Dynamics money touched this project. Not for equipment, not for materials, not for the lab space I rented across town, not even for the coffee I drank while working on it. Henry's mouth was opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The transfer documents he'd been so proud to sign suddenly looked like what they were, worthless pieces of paper signed by a man who had no legal right to transfer something he didn't own. You can't do this, Claire whispered, but there was no conviction in her voice. She knew I could. Hell, she was probably already calculating how much alimony she'd lose in the divorce that was definitely coming after this shit show. Actually, I can, I said cheerfully. In fact, I already did. See, while you were busy planning my professional funeral, I was busy making sure every I was dotted and every T was crossed. My intellectual property, my funding, my patent. The holy trinity of go fuck yourself, Henry. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced down with theatrical casualness. Another message from the patent office. Google Incorporated raising initial bid to $4.0 billion. Microsoft submitting competing offer. Apple requesting private meeting. The directors around the table made this collective gasping sound, like a choir of asthmatics having simultaneous attacks. For billion. With AB. These people were looking at numbers so big they probably needed calculators just to count the zeros. For billion now, I announced casually, like I was discussing the weather. Funny how competition works, isn't it? Supply and demand, basic economics. Though I guess they don't teach that in MBA programs anymore. Henry finally found enough of his voice to croak out. This is betrayal. Your family. Family. I laughed, and it wasn't a nice laugh. It was the kind of laugh that could cut glass and make small children cry. Henry, you've treated me like something you scraped off your shoe since the day I married your daughter. You've undermined my work, dismissed my ideas, and made it clear that you thought Claire married beneath her station. And Claire. I turned to look at my dear wife, who was still dabbing wine stains from her ruined blouse. Well, Claire's made it pretty obvious that she's been waiting for an excuse to trade up to someone with a bigger bank account. The truth hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Everyone in that room knew exactly how the Aldrich family had treated me. The snide comments at dinner parties, the eye rolls during presentations, the way they'd introduce me as Claire's husband, instead of using my name, like I was some kind of accessory. My phone buzzed a third time. Amazon was now in the bidding war. For $0.5 billion and climbing. I stood up slowly, gathering my notes and closing my laptop. The transfer documents that Henry had signed with such theatrical flair were still sitting on the table, but now they looked like what they'd always been, garbage. Legal toilet paper signed by a man who'd just discovered he'd been playing checkers while I was playing chess. Gentlemen, I said to the shell-shocked board members, ladies, it's been enlightening. I'll be in touch through my attorney regarding the transition of ownership. Oh, and Henry. I paused at the door, savoring this final moment. You might want to update your LinkedIn profile. I hear the job market's pretty competitive these days. And with that, I walked out of the boardroom, leaving behind a table full of people whose entire world had just been turned upside down by the quiet, underestimated son-in-law they'd never bothered to take seriously. By 7:30 the next morning, the board of Aldrich Dynamics had convened what they were calling an emergency session, which was corporate speak for holy shit. We're fucked and need to figure out how to unfuck ourselves before the market opens. I'd barely gotten 3 hours of sleep, not because I was stressed, but because I kept waking up with this stupid grin on my face, replaying yesterday's boardroom massacre in my head like highlights from the Super Bowl. Henry was already planted in his usual spot at the head of the table when I walked in, looking like he'd aged about 10 years overnight. His perfectly styled silver hair was disheveled, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and he had these dark circles under his eyes that made him look like a raccoon who'd been hit by a garbage truck. The man was clearly running on pure rage and espresso at this point. His face was still that lovely shade of red that suggested his blood pressure was somewhere in the stroke risk zone. And Claire was perched next to him like some kind of designer vulture, whispering poison in his ear. The sight of them huddled together, probably plotting my demise, should have made me nervous. Instead, it just made me want to laugh. These people still thought they were playing the same game we'd been playing yesterday, not realizing that the rules had completely changed and I was now the one holding all the cards. I strolled into that boardroom like I owned the place, which, as it turned out, I basically did, but we'll get to that juicy little detail in a minute. Right behind me came Marcus Hale, my attorney, carrying what looked like enough legal documentation to choke a horse. Marcus was one of those lawyers who looked like he could argue with God and win, the kind of guy who wore $1,000 suits and charged by the minute for breathing in your general direction. But he was worth every penny, especially for moments like this. "Good morning, everyone," I said cheerfully, taking my usual seat at the table like nothing had changed. "Beautiful day, isn't it? I love the smell of corporate desperation in the morning." Henry's eye twitched. Claire looked like she was sucking on a lemon that had been marinating in vinegar. The other board members sat around the table looking like they'd all been collectively kicked in the nuts by life itself. Marcus, bless his cold legal heart, didn't waste any time with pleasantries. He opened his briefcase and started distributing thick legal binders to each person around the table, moving with the efficiency of a man who'd done this dance 1,000 times before. Each binder hit the polished wood with a satisfying thunk, and I watched the directors' faces go pale as they realized just how much paperwork was about to ruin their day. Inside those binders, Marcus announced in his courtroom voice, "You'll find documented proof of Mr. Thompson's patents, complete records of his independent funding sources, and most importantly, a clause that was embedded in Aldridge Dynamics' corporate charter. Specifically, Clause 47, Paragraph 3. The room went quiet except for the sound of pages rustling as everyone scrambled to find the relevant section. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment like fine wine. This was the part I'd been looking forward to since I'd first discovered that little legal landmine buried in the company's founding documents. Clause 47, Paragraph 3. Marcus continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who could quote legal precedents in his sleep, states that in any attempt to misappropriate intellectual property created by an employee or contractor, majority voting shares would automatically transfer to the creator of said property. This clause was written into the charter by Henry Aldridge himself, ironically, to protect the company from employees stealing ideas. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Henry had basically set up his own corporate death trap 20 years ago, probably never imagining that it would one day be used against him by his own son-in-law. I could see the exact moment the realization hit him. His face went from red to white to green in about 3 seconds flat. "That's impossible," Claire shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that probably shattered windows in nearby buildings. "This is manipulation. This is fraud. This is legal," Marcus interrupted smoothly. "Completely and utterly legal. The moment your father signed those transfer documents yesterday, attempting to give away intellectual property that didn't belong to the company, he triggered Clause 47, Paragraph 3. Congratulations, Mr. Thompson. You now own controlling interest in Aldridge Dynamics." The silence that followed was absolutely beautiful. I'm talking about the kind of silence that comes right before a nuclear explosion, the moment when everyone realizes that their entire world is about to change forever. Henry's mouth was hanging open, so wide I was worried he might catch flies, and Claire looked like she was having some kind of breakdown. But wait, folks, it gets better. "There's more," I said, pulling out my tablet with the theatrical flair of a magician revealing his final trick. "See, I've been documenting some interesting behavior patterns for the past year. Amazing what people will do when they think nobody's watching." I started clicking through a slideshow that I'd been putting together for months. Security footage, recorded conversations, email screenshots. I'd been collecting evidence like a detective on steroids. The first slide showed Claire entering the office at midnight 3 months ago, using her executive access to break into the R&D files. Turns out, while Henry was busy dismissing my work as a science fiction, his darling daughter was stealing research data and selling it to competitors. I announced casually. Funny how that works, isn't it? Claire's face went from white to green. You were spying on me? Sweetie, I wasn't spying, I said with mock sympathy. I was protecting my intellectual property. There's a difference. See, when your husband starts acting like James Bond, it's usually because his wife is acting like Benedict Arnold. The next slide showed Claire meeting with executives from 3 different tech companies, passing along stolen research in exchange for what looked like briefcases full of cash. The slide after that showed her forging my signature on documents, trying to transfer patent applications to shell companies she'd set up. For the past year, I continued, I've been attending board meetings disguised as janitors, coffee servers, and maintenance staff. Turns out when you dress like the help, rich people literally don't see you. It's like having an invisibility cloak made of minimum wage. I clicked to another slide showing myself in a janitor's uniform, emptying trash cans right behind Henry as he discussed plans to get rid of the dead weight with other executives. Another slide showed me in a barista outfit, serving coffee while Claire bragged to her friends about how she was going to upgrade to a richer husband once my project failed. You people never even noticed me, I said, shaking my head in amazement. I was right there, listening to every conversation, recording every betrayal, documenting every illegal activity. And you treated me like furniture. Henry finally found his voice. This is entrapment. This is illegal surveillance. Actually, it's not. Marcus interjected with the satisfaction of a man who lived for moments like this. All recordings were made in public spaces or company property where there's no reasonable expectation of privacy. Everything here is completely admissible in court. The board members were looking around the table like they were trying to figure out which lifeboat to jump into first. These people could smell a sinking ship from miles away, and right now the SS Aldridge was taking on water fast. My phone buzzed. Another message from the patent office. The bidding war was now up to $6 billion and climbing. Tech giants were literally throwing money at each other trying to get their hands on my algorithm. So here's how this is going to work, I announced, standing up and straightening my tie. Henry, you're going to clean out your office. Claire, you're going to pack your shit and find somewhere else to live. And the rest of you are going to learn what it means to work for someone who actually gives a damn about innovation instead of just padding the quarterly reports. I looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. Welcome to the new Aldridge Dynamics, folks. Try not to fuck it up. I wasn't done yet. Not even close. While everyone was still processing the bombshell that I now owned their asses, I had one more present to unwrap for this delightful little family gathering. The best part about revenge isn't the initial strike. It's watching your enemies realize just how deep the rabbit hole goes, how thoroughly they've been outplayed, and how spectacularly they've underestimated the quiet guy they've been shitting on for years. Oh, Claire, I said sweetly, clicking to the next slide with all the enthusiasm of a kid on Christmas morning. We haven't even gotten to the good part yet. My darling wife was sitting there looking like she'd been hit by a freight train full of karma, her face cycling through about 12 different shades of panic. Her perfectly manicured hands were shaking as she gripped the edge of the table, and I could practically hear her brain short-circuiting as she tried to figure out how much legal trouble she was in. Spoiler alert, it was a lot. The new slide filled the conference room's massive wall-mounted screen with a detailed timeline that would have made the FBI jealous. Names, dates, dollar amounts, and photographs, all meticulously organized like a serial killer's murder board. Except instead of tracking victims, I'd been tracking corporate espionage and patent theft. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced like a game show host revealing the grand prize. I present to you the complete record of Claire Aldridge Thompson's greatest hits. And by hits, I mean the careers she destroyed, the researchers she sabotaged, and the innovations she buried to protect her own mediocre ass. The first name on the list was Dr. Sarah Chun, a brilliant materials scientist who'd been working on revolutionary battery technology 3 years ago. Claire had gotten her fired by planting evidence that she was selling trade secrets to Chinese competitors. The truth, which I'd uncovered through some creative investigative work, was that Claire had been the one selling secrets, and she'd framed Sarah to cover her tracks. Sarah Chun, I said, letting the name hang in the air like an accusation. Ring any bells, sweetheart? Brilliant woman, groundbreaking research, mysteriously fired right before her patent applications were approved. Those patents, by the way, somehow ended up filed under your name 6 months later. Claire's face had gone so pale, she looked like a vampire who'd been living on a diet of nothing but fear and regret. That's not. I never. Oh, but you did. I interrupted, clicking to show email screenshots that would have made a prosecutor weep with joy. I've got your emails, your bank records, even the receipts from the restaurant where you celebrated screwing over yet another colleague. You had the surf and turf, if I remember correctly. $90 lobster to celebrate destroying a woman's career. Classy. The directors around the table were looking at Claire like she'd just revealed herself to be the corporate equivalent of a serial killer. Which, in a way, she kind of was. Instead of bodies, she left behind ruined careers and stolen dreams. But the principle was the same. I clicked to the next name, Dr. Marcus Rodriguez, a computer engineer who'd been developing quantum encryption algorithms. Claire had sabotaged his lab equipment and then blamed the resulting data loss on his incompetence. She'd gotten him blacklisted from the entire tech industry while quietly stealing his research and selling it to defense contractors. Marcus Rodriguez. I continued my little presentation of horrors. Remember him? The guy whose lab mysteriously suffered that equipment malfunction that destroyed 6 months of research? Funny thing about security cameras, they see everything, even when people think they're being sneaky. The slide showed grainy but clear footage of Claire sneaking into Rodriguez's lab at 2 in the morning, systematically destroying equipment and wiping servers. She was wearing all black like some kind of corporate ninja, but her distinctive walk and that ridiculous designer handbag gave her away immediately. You bitch, whispered one of the directors, a gray-haired woman named Patricia who'd apparently worked with Rodriguez. Marcus was brilliant. He had 3 kids to feed, and you destroyed him for what? A few million in stolen patents. Claire was openly crying now, mascara running down her cheeks like black tears. But I wasn't feeling particularly sympathetic. This woman had spent years systematically destroying innocent people's lives to advance her own career, and now she was upset because she'd finally been caught? Please. The slideshow continued. Dr. James Park, whose revolutionary solar cell design Claire had stolen and buried because it would have made her own energy division obsolete. Dr. Lisa Washington, whose AI research Claire had sabotaged because she was afraid of being shown up by someone younger and smarter. Dr. Robert Kim, whose medical device innovations Claire had stolen and sold to pharmaceutical companies for kickbacks. The list went on, a parade of brilliant minds whose work had been stolen, whose careers had been ruined, whose innovations had been buried. Also that Claire could maintain her position as head of the innovation division without actually having to innovate anything herself. 12 researchers, I announced, letting the number sink in. 12 brilliant minds, representing probably 50 years of combined experience and research, all destroyed by one selfish, talentless parasite who couldn't stand the thought of actually earning her position. Henry was staring at his daughter like he was seeing her for the first time, and what he was seeing clearly horrified him. Claire, he whispered, his voice cracking like old leather. Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't. She did, I said firmly. Every single bit of it. And here's the beautiful part. She documented everything herself. Emails bragging about her strategic personnel decisions. Text messages to her friends about eliminating the competition. Bank records showing payments from companies that mysteriously received stolen research data shortly after each firing. The board members were whispering among themselves, their voices rising in anger as they realized the full scope of what Claire had done. These people might have been corporate sharks, but they understood the difference between ruthless business practices and outright theft. What Claire had done wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. My phone buzzed again. Another message from my lawyer. FBI contacted. Formal investigation opening. Multiple felony charges likely. Oh, and Claire, I said, showing her my phone screen. The FBI is very interested in having a chat with you. Something about wire fraud, corporate espionage, and racketeering. Apparently, destroying people's careers while stealing their intellectual property is frowned upon by federal authorities. Who knew? Claire let out this weird, keening sound, like a wounded animal realizing it was trapped. You can't do this to me. I'm your wife. I'm family. Henry slammed his fist on the table so hard that everyone's coffee jumped. Family, he roared, his face turning that dangerous shade of purple that meant his blood pressure was approaching liftoff. You destroyed this company. You destroyed innocent people. You're a goddamn criminal. She's your daughter. I shot back, standing up and leaning across the table. This is the family you chose over integrity, over innovation, over doing what's right. This is what you get when you value profit over people and politics over progress. The security team I'd called earlier, because I'd learned to plan ahead, entered the boardroom right on cue. Two professional-looking guys in dark suits who moved with the kind of confidence that comes from years of dealing with corporate criminals. Ms. Thompson, one of them said politely, "We need you to come with us. You have the right to remain silent." As they read Claire her rights and escorted her out of the boardroom, she turned back to look at me with pure hatred in her eyes. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You'll pay for this." I smiled and waved goodbye. "No, sweetheart. You already paid. With interest." With Claire being perp walked out of the boardroom like some white-collar criminal from a Law and Order episode, you'd think the drama was over. But honestly, I was just getting warmed up. The best part about having spent 2 years planning this corporate coup wasn't the revenge. Though that was pretty damn satisfying, it was finally getting to reveal the ace I'd been hiding up my sleeve this entire time. "All right, everyone," I said, walking over to the wall panel that controlled the room's lighting and presentation systems. "Now that we've cleared out the trash, let's talk about why you're all going to want to keep your jobs and maybe even start taking me seriously for once." I dimmed the lights with theatrical flair that would have made Henry proud, if Henry hadn't been sitting there looking like someone had just told him Santa Claus was a registered sex offender. The massive wall screen flickered to life, and what appeared made everyone in that room stop breathing for about 5 seconds straight. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced with the kind of grin that probably made me look slightly psychotic, "I present to you Project Genesis." The screen showed architectural blueprints that looked like something out of a James Bond movie. Cross-sections, floor plans, and 3D renderings of what was clearly an underground facility that put NASA's mission control to shame. This wasn't some dingy basement lab with second-hand equipment and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look like corpses. This was a full-scale, state-of-the-art research complex that stretched out like an underground city. The gasps from around the table were absolutely music to my ears. These people had spent so much time looking down on me that they'd never bothered to wonder what I was actually doing with my time. While they were playing corporate politics and stabbing each other in the back, I'd been building the future right under their noses. "What the hell is that?" Patricia whispered, leaning forward so far she almost fell out of her chair. Her reading glasses were practically steamed up as she tried to process what she was seeing. "That," I said with the satisfaction of a magician revealing his greatest trick, "is a fully operational quantum research facility located approximately 200 feet directly beneath my modest little lab across town. The one you all assumed was just me playing with chemistry sets and delusions of grandeur." Henry's mouth was hanging open so wide I could see his dental work. "That's impossible," he managed to croak. "Something that size, the permits alone would cost millions, the construction, the equipment." 3 football fields, I interrupted cheerfully. "That's how big it is. 3 full football fields of the most advanced quantum research equipment on the planet, staffed by some of the brightest minds in theoretical physics, computer science, and applied mathematics. You know, the kind of minds that Aldrich Dynamics has been systematically firing and blacklisting for the past 5 years." The next slide showed the funding breakdown, and I watched several board members' eyes bug out like cartoon characters. The numbers were staggering, not just because of the amount, but because of where the money had come from. Private investors who actually believed in innovation rather than quarterly profit margins. Tech billionaires who understood that sometimes you had to spend money to change the world. Government grants that I'd secured by actually proving my concepts worked instead of just promising they might work someday. Funded entirely through my grandmother's trust and a consortium of private investors. I continued, savoring every word. $67 million in initial investment, with an additional $40 million in equipment and staffing over the past 18 months. All completely independent of Aldridge Dynamics, all completely legal, and all completely mine. The third slide showed the construction timeline, with time-lapse photography that made the whole project look like some kind of engineering miracle. Crews working around the clock, massive equipment being lowered through specially constructed shafts, concrete being poured into forms that would make ancient Roman architects weep with envy. "How did you keep this secret?" asked Robert Chun, one of the younger board members who actually seemed impressed rather than just terrified. "Something this size, this many people involved. How did nobody notice?" "Compartmentalization," I explained, clicking to a slide that showed the project's organizational structure. Each construction crew only knew about their specific section. Equipment suppliers thought they were fulfilling orders for multiple smaller projects. The permits were filed under 17 different shell companies across 3 states. And most importantly, everyone involved signed NDAs with penalty clauses that would bankrupt small countries. But the real showstopper came when Dr. Sofia Ramirez stepped into the boardroom. I'd been wondering when she'd show up. We'd planned this entrance perfectly, timing it right after the construction reveal for maximum impact. Sofia walked in like she owned the place, which in a way, she kind of did. She was my head of research, my second in command, and the woman who'd helped turn my theoretical algorithms into working reality. The look on Henry's face when he saw her was absolutely priceless. Sofia had been one of Aldridge Dynamics' most promising physicists 3 years ago, right up until Claire had gotten her fired for insubordination. The real crime? Sofia had refused to let Claire steal her research on quantum field manipulation, and she'd made the mistake of documenting Claire's attempts at theft. "Hello, Henry," Sofia said with a smile that could cut glass. "Fancy seeing you here." Henry looked like he'd just seen a ghost, if ghosts wore lab coats and carried tablets full of world-changing research data. "Sofia, but we terminated. You illegally terminated me for refusing to participate in intellectual property theft," she corrected smoothly. "Fortunately, David here offered me a position where I could actually do science instead of playing corporate politics." Sofia walked over to the presentation screen and pulled up a new set of slides that made everyone's previous gasps sound like whispers. Technical diagrams, test results, and performance metrics that looked like science fiction made real. "With David's quantum stability algorithm," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent 3 years proving the impossible, "we've created the world's first stable, room-temperature quantum computer. Not a prototype that works for 30 seconds under ideal laboratory conditions. Not a proof of concept that might work someday, if we're lucky. A fully functional quantum processing unit that fits in a laptop case and operates at normal atmospheric pressure and temperature." The silence that followed was the kind you hear right before a nuclear explosion. These people were looking at technology that would make current computers look like stone tools, processing power that could solve problems in minutes that would take traditional supercomputers decades to crack. My phone buzzed again. Another message from the patent office. Current bidding at $7.2 billion. Department of Defense requesting immediate consultation. Chinese delegation offering state-level negotiations. $7.2 billion. The number was so big it didn't even feel real anymore. We were talking about enough. Money to fund entire countries' annual budgets, to solve global problems, to literally change the world. "The prototype is ready," Sofia continued, and I swear I could hear the stock market having a collective heart attack from 30 floors up. "We've successfully demonstrated stable quantum entanglement, perfect error correction, and processing speeds that exceed our wildest projections. We're not just ahead of the competition. We've lapped them so many times they can't even see our dust." I looked around the boardroom at all these people who'd spent years treating me like an inconvenient relative who couldn't take a hint. Henry, who'd dismissed my work as science fiction. The board members who'd rolled their eyes every time I tried to explain quantum mechanics. The executives who'd made jokes about my fantasy projects behind my back. Now they were all staring at me like I'd just pulled the Hope Diamond out of my ass and announced I was opening a jewelry store. "Questions?" I asked innocently. Henry's face went through more color changes than a chameleon having an identity crisis. First red, then white, Then this sickly green shade that reminded me of expired guacamole. He was gripping the edge of the conference table so hard his knuckles had gone bone white, and I could practically see the gears grinding in his head as he tried to process the magnitude of what he'd just learned. Those scientists, Henry finally managed to stammer, his voice cracking like a 13-year-old boy asking someone to prom. They were terminated. Fired. Gone. We made sure they could never work in this industry again. See, that's where you're wrong again, Hank, I said, using that nickname that made his eye twitch like he'd been electrocuted. You didn't fire them. You illegally terminated them. There's a pretty significant legal difference between the two, and my lawyers have been documenting every single wrongful termination case for the past 3 years. I clicked to the next slide, which showed an organizational chart that looked like a who's who of scientific brilliance. Every name on that chart was someone who'd been screwed over by Aldrich Dynamics, someone whose career had been derailed by corporate politics and Claire's systematic sabotage campaigns. Dr. James Park, your former head of renewable energy research, I announced, pointing to the first name on the list. Fired for budget reasons right after he developed solar cells with 93% efficiency. He's now my director of sustainable technology, and his patents are worth about $800 million. Henry's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He remembered James, all right. The man had been one of their most promising researchers until Claire had convinced Henry that he was too expensive and not a team player. The real reason? James had refused to sign over his patent rights to the company. Dr. Lisa Washington, I continued, enjoying the way Henry flinched at each name. Terminated for performance issues after she developed AI algorithms that could predict market trends with unprecedented accuracy. She's now running my financial modeling department, and her work is why I knew exactly when to file my patents for maximum impact. The slide showed Lisa's breakthrough research, algorithms so sophisticated they made Wall Street's best prediction models look like magic 8 balls. She tried to present her work to the Aldrich board 2 years ago, but Claire had sabotaged the presentation by accidentally corrupting the data files right before the meeting. Dr. Robert Kim, I went on, my voice getting stronger with each revelation. Fired for restructuring reasons after he developed medical devices that could detect cancer cells with 98% accuracy using nothing but a smartphone camera. He's now my head of biomedical research, and his work is going to save about 1 million lives per year. Each name I read was like another nail in Henry's coffin. These weren't just random employees who'd been let go during budget cuts. These were the best and brightest minds in their respective fields, and Henry had thrown them all away because his daughter was too insecure to work alongside people who were smarter than her. The people you discarded, I said, my voice taking on an edge that could have cut through steel. The researchers you blacklisted, the innovators you destroyed, they're all working for me now. Every single brilliant mind that Aldrich Dynamics threw away like garbage is now part of something bigger, something better, something that's going to make your little corporate empire look like a lemonade stand. Henry was shaking now, and not just his hands. His whole body was trembling like a leaf in a hurricane as the full magnitude of his mistakes hit him. All those terminations he'd signed off on, all those careers he'd destroyed at Claire's urging, all those innovations he'd buried, they were all coming back to haunt him. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. I pulled out a manila folder that had been sitting in my briefcase like a loaded gun, waiting for this exact moment. The folder was thick, stuffed with documents that represented months of careful investigation and legal preparation. I slid it across the table to Henry with the kind of casual gesture you'd use to pass the salt. Your retirement package, I announced cheerfully. I'd suggest you read through it carefully and sign it before the SEC and FBI finish their investigations. Henry's hands shook as he opened the folder, and I watched his face go from green to gray as he read through the contents. Inside were termination papers, pension documents, and a very detailed list of all the illegal activities that had been happening under his watch. Corporate espionage, patent theft, wrongful termination, securities fraud. The list went on for pages. This is extortion, Henry whispered, but there was no conviction in his voice. He knew he was fucked, and he knew I had him dead to rights. No, Henry, I corrected gently. This is consequences. You spent 20 years building an empire based on intimidation, theft, and the systematic destruction of anyone who threatened your position. You created a corporate culture where innovation was punished and conformity was rewarded. You let your daughter turn the company into her personal piggy bank while she destroyed careers for fun. This is just the bill coming due. The board members were looking back and forth between Henry and me like they were watching the world's most expensive tennis match. I could practically see them calculating their own survival odds, wondering which side of this corporate war they needed to be on to keep their jobs. My phone buzzed again, and I glanced down to see another message that made me smile. The stock price was going absolutely insane. Aldrich Dynamics stock was climbing so fast the trading algorithms couldn't keep up. We were looking at the biggest single-day gain in the company's history, and it was all because the market had figured out that the quiet son-in-law everyone had been ignoring was actually a genius. 8.3 billion now, I announced casually, showing my phone to the room. Amazon, Google, Microsoft, Apple, and Tesla are all in a bidding war for exclusive licensing rights. The Pentagon is offering a blank check for military applications. China just called offering to trade 3 provinces and their national debt for the technology. Henry looked like he might actually pass out. The man who'd built his entire identity around being the smartest guy in the room was realizing that he'd been played by someone he'd never even bothered to take seriously. The board of directors, I continued, standing up and walking around the table like a predator circling wounded prey, has exactly 30 seconds to decide whether they want to be part of the new Aldrich Dynamics or if they'd prefer to update their resumes. Because in about 5 minutes, I'm going to be sitting in that chair. I pointed to Henry's seat at the head of the table, and anyone who's not on board with the new direction can clean out their offices. I looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. These people had spent years treating me like furniture, ignoring my ideas, dismissing my contributions, and generally acting like I was some kind of charity case that Claire had dragged in off the street. Now they were all staring at me with the kind of respect that only comes from absolute terror and the sudden realization that their entire future depended on staying in my good graces. All in favor of the new management structure, I said, raising my hand. Say aye. The chorus of aye that followed was so unanimous you'd have thought they were voting on free pizza for everyone. 1 month later, walking through the Aldrich Dynamics headquarters felt like stepping into a completely different universe. Gone was the oppressive corporate atmosphere where innovation went to die and ass-kissing was considered a core competency. The place was buzzing with actual energy now, the kind of electricity you feel when brilliant minds are finally free to do what they do best without some trust fund princess sabotaging their work every 5 minutes. The first thing I'd done after officially taking over was tear down Henry's ridiculous executive fortress on the top floor. That pretentious corner office with its marble floors, imported leather furniture, and walls lined with awards for business excellence got gutted faster than a fish at a sushi restaurant. In its place, we'd built something that would have given the old Henry a heart attack. Transparent laboratory spaces where anyone could see the actual work being done. No more closed-door meetings where careers went to die. No more secret handshakes and golf course deals that determined who got funding and who got fired. Everything was out in the open now, because when you're actually doing groundbreaking science instead of playing corporate politics, transparency becomes your best friend rather than your worst enemy. Dr. Sofia Ramirez had transformed the entire 15th floor into what looked like mission control for launching rockets to Mars. Banks of quantum computers hummed quietly in climate-controlled chambers, their processing power so intense they could solve mathematical problems that would have taken traditional supercomputers until the heat death of the universe. The walls were covered with white boards filled with equations that looked like someone had taken calculus and beaten it to death with theoretical physics. How are the climate simulations coming along? I asked Sophia as I walked through her domain, watching her team of formerly blacklisted scientists work their magic. We solved the Pacific Ocean temperature modeling problem yesterday, she said with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather instead of announcing a breakthrough that climate scientists had been struggling with for decades. Turns out when you have quantum processing power that doesn't choke on massive datasets, you can predict weather patterns 6 months out with 97% accuracy. 6 months. The best meteorologists in the world struggled to predict weather accurately beyond 5 days, and my team had just extended that timeline by a factor of 36. The implications were staggering: crop planning, disaster preparedness, energy grid management, shipping routes. We were looking at technology that could prevent famines and save thousands of lives from natural disasters. Down on the 12th floor, Dr. James Park had turned what used to be Claire's innovation division. And I use that term loosely since the only thing she'd ever innovated was new ways to steal other people's work into a renewable energy research paradise. Solar panels that looked like they belonged on alien spacecraft covered every available surface, feeding power back into the building's grid and making our monthly electric bills look like pocket change. The protein folding breakthrough is working better than we projected, James called out as I walked through his lab. He was standing in front of a holographic display that showed molecular structures rotating in three-dimensional space, their bonds and interactions mapped out in real time by our quantum computers. We're looking at drug development timelines that are about 50 times faster than current industry standards. 50 times faster. The pharmaceutical industry typically took 15 years and billions of dollars to develop new medications. We were talking about reducing that to months instead of decades, turning drug discovery from a slow-motion marathon into a sprint. Cancer treatments, Alzheimer's research, rare disease cures, all suddenly within reach instead of perpetually 5 years away, like they'd been for the past 50 years. The best part wasn't just the scientific breakthroughs, though those were pretty damn spectacular. The best part was watching the people who'd been crushed by Henry and Claire's regime come back to life. Scientists who'd been working dead-end jobs at community colleges were now leading research teams that were literally changing the world. Researchers who'd been blacklisted from the industry were publishing papers that were getting cited thousands of times before the ink was even dry. Dr. Lisa Washington had taken over the 8th floor and turned it into what looked like the world's most sophisticated financial war room. Her AI algorithms were running continuously, analyzing market trends, predicting economic shifts, and managing investment portfolios with success rates that made Wall Street's best hedge fund managers look like children playing with monopoly money. The encryption systems are making banks nervous, Lisa mentioned as I stopped by her workstation. We've created quantum encryption that's literally mathematically impossible to break using any known computational methods. The NSA called twice today asking if we're planning to share with friendly governments or if they need to start planning for a world where their current surveillance methods are obsolete. The irony wasn't lost on me. A month ago, these same government agencies had been perfectly happy to let Aldridge Dynamics stagnate under Henry's leadership, probably figuring that American technological superiority was safe as long as we kept throwing money at the same old approaches. Now they were scrambling to understand how a company they'd written off had suddenly leapfrogged decades ahead of everyone else. My phone buzzed constantly with requests from reporters, government officials, foreign delegations, and corporate executives who all wanted to understand how the hell we'd pulled off this transformation. The bidding war for our quantum computing patents had reached $12 billion and was still climbing. Tech companies that had been dismissing quantum computing as 10 years away were now offering to buy entire divisions just to get access to our research. But the most satisfying calls were from Claire's former victims. The researchers she'd destroyed, the innovators she'd buried, the brilliant minds she'd driven out of the industry. Dr. Sarah Chun had called to thank me personally for clearing her name and restoring her reputation. Dr. Marcus Rodriguez was collaborating with our security division to develop quantum encrypted communication systems. Dr. Robert Kim was working with our biomedical team to integrate his cancer detection technology with our processing power. Every single person whose career Claire had destroyed was now thriving, their work finally getting the recognition and resources it deserved. Meanwhile, Claire herself was sitting in a federal detention center awaiting trial on enough felony charges to keep her busy for the next couple of decades. Henry had quietly signed his retirement papers and disappeared to his beach house in the Hamptons, probably spending his days drinking expensive scotch and wondering how the quiet son-in-law he'd dismissed as worthless had managed to outplay him so completely. The man who'd built his identity around being the smartest guy in the room had been checkmated by someone he'd never bothered to take seriously. The revolution wasn't just technological, it was cultural. Instead of a corporate hierarchy built on fear and intimidation, We'd created a collaborative environment where the best ideas won regardless of who thought of them. Instead of quarterly profit reports that prioritized short-term gains over long-term innovation, we were focused on solving problems that would matter 50 years from now. And for the first time in my adult life, I walked through those office hallways knowing that I wasn't the overlooked husband, the dismissed son-in-law, or the quiet guy everyone ignored. I was the man who'd taken a dying company and transformed it into something that would change the world. I was reviewing quarterly projections in my office, Henry's former throne room that I'd converted into something that actually resembled a workspace instead of a shrine to corporate ego, when my secretary buzzed in with news that made me damn near spit coffee all over my computer screen. "Sir, Margaret Aldridge is here to see you," she said through the intercom, her voice carrying that special tone people use when they're delivering news that's somewhere between surprising and potentially apocalyptic. Margaret, Claire's mother, Henry's wife, the woman who'd perfected the art of looking down her nose at people from such great heights that she could probably see their dandruff from orbit. In all the years I'd been married to her daughter, Margaret had spoken to me exactly 14 times, and most of those conversations had consisted of her asking me to fetch her coat or move my car because it was cluttering up the circular drive. "Send her in," I said, curious as hell about what could possibly bring the Queen of Aldridge Dynasty social climbing to my office. The last time I'd seen Margaret, she'd been at Claire's arraignment, sitting in the gallery looking like someone had just told her that caviar was actually fish eggs, and poor people had been eating it for centuries. The woman who walked through my office door was not the Margaret Aldridge I remembered. Gone were the designer suits that cost more than most people's cars, the pearl necklaces that could probably fund a small country's education budget, and that perfectly coiffed hair that looked like it had been styled by angels who charged by the hour. Instead, she was wearing a simple navy blazer that looked like it came from an actual store where normal humans shop, and her hair was, well, it looked like hair. Just regular, human hair that hadn't been sculpted into submission by a team of professionals. But it was her eyes that really threw me. Margaret Aldridge had always looked at the world with the supreme confidence of someone who'd never been wrong about anything in her entire privileged life. Now she looked tired, older, and for the first time since I'd known her, genuinely uncertain about something. "David," she said simply, and even her voice was different. No condescension, no barely concealed disgust, no tone that suggested she was doing me a tremendous favor by acknowledging my existence. Just weariness. "Margaret," I replied, gesturing to one of the chairs across from my desk. "This is unexpected." She sat down carefully, like someone who'd recently discovered that the world was more fragile than she'd previously believed. For a long moment, we just looked at each other across the desk where her husband had once held court like some kind of corporate emperor. "We dismissed you," she said finally, her voice so quiet I had to lean forward to hear her properly. "All of us. From the very beginning, we dismissed everything about you. Your work, your ideas, your potential. We treated you like—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Like you were some kind of charity case that Claire had dragged home out of misplaced sympathy." I didn't say anything. What was there to say? She was absolutely right, and we both knew it. "We were wrong," she continued, and those 3 words carried more weight than anything she'd ever said to me before. Catastrophically, completely, inexcusably wrong. Margaret reached into her purse, a simple black leather bag that probably cost less than what she used to spend on lunch, and pulled out a manila folder that looked like it had seen better days. She placed it on my desk with the careful reverence someone might use when handling historical documents. "I found this in Henry's study when I was cleaning out his papers," she said, hidden in the back of his filing cabinet, behind his golf tournament trophies. I opened the folder, and what I saw inside made my chest tighten with emotions I hadn't expected. Photocopies of my early sketches, equations I'd scrawled on napkins during family dinners, research notes I'd shared with Henry years ago when I'd still been naive enough to think he might actually listen. Page after page of my work, carefully organized and preserved, dating back almost to the beginning of my marriage to Claire. "Even then," Margaret said, her voice starting to tremble, "even in those early days when you were just starting to develop your theories, you were trying to show us. You brought Henry those equations, remember? You tried to explain your ideas about quantum stability during Christmas dinner 3 years ago. You were so excited, so passionate about the possibilities. I remembered. God, how could I forget? I'd been like a kid showing off a science fair project, genuinely believing that my father-in-law might be interested in what I was working on. Instead, Henry had barely glanced at my notes before dismissing them as theoretical nonsense and changing the subject to stock prices. We didn't listen, Margaret continued, and now there were actual tears in her eyes. Tears. From a woman I'd never seen display any emotion stronger than mild annoyance at the help bringing the wrong vintage of wine. We were so convinced that we knew better, that our way of doing business was the only way that mattered. We couldn't see past our own arrogance long enough to recognize genius when it was sitting at our dinner table. She reached across the desk and touched the folder gently, like it was something precious that might crumble if handled too roughly. You could have changed everything, David. If we'd just listened, if we'd just given you the support and resources you needed instead of treating you like an inconvenience. Imagine what we could have accomplished together. The irony was almost too bitter to swallow. Here I was, sitting in Henry's chair, running the company he'd built, commanding the respect he'd always craved. And his wife was finally acknowledging that the son-in-law they'd dismissed as worthless had been the key to everything they'd claimed to want. Why are you telling me this? I asked quietly. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands like they held answers to questions she was still learning how to ask. Because I need you to know that not all of us were blind by choice. Henry was so invested in being right about everything that he couldn't admit when he was wrong. And Claire. Her voice broke slightly. Claire was so threatened by anyone who might outshine her that she turned sabotage into an art form. She looked up at me then, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before, genuine remorse. But I should have known better, she said firmly. I should have seen what you were capable of. I should have stood up to Henry when he dismissed your work. I should have protected you from Claire's machinations. I should have been the mother-in-law you deserved instead of the one you got stuck with. I felt something inside my chest loosen, a knot of resentment I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. This wasn't the apology I'd expected to receive, mainly because I'd never expected to receive one at all. What do you want, Margaret? I asked, not unkindly. She straightened up slightly, and for a moment I caught a glimpse of the formidable woman she'd always been, just pointed in a different direction now. I want to help, she said simply. I want to make amends. I want to take my father's charitable foundation, the one that's been funding country club renovations and society galas for the past 20 years, and turn it into something that actually matters. I want to fund young innovators, support researchers who are getting dismissed by people like we used to be, give brilliant minds the resources they need to change the world. She leaned forward earnestly. I want to make sure that the next David Thompson doesn't have to wait 10 years and stage a corporate revolution just to get someone to take his ideas seriously. And for the first time since this whole saga began, I found myself genuinely surprised by a member of the Aldrich family. 3 months later, the boardroom that had once been the site of my corporate execution had transformed into something that looked like mission control for launching humanity into the next century. The same mahogany table where Henry had tried to flush my life's work down the toilet was now surrounded by scientists, researchers, and government officials who were practically vibrating with excitement over breakthroughs that were happening faster than we could document them. The morning briefings had become the highlight of my day, mainly because every single report sounded like science fiction that had decided to become reality just to prove the skeptics wrong. Today was no different, except that the numbers were so ridiculous they'd stopped feeling like real money and started feeling like high scores in some cosmic video game. Cancer trials are showing success rates we've never seen before, Dr. Sofia Ramirez announced, pulling up holographic displays that made the room look like the bridge of a starship. The quantum-enhanced targeting system can identify and eliminate malignant cells with 98.7% accuracy while leaving healthy tissue completely untouched. 98.7%. Traditional chemotherapy had success rates that made coin flips look like sure bets, and we'd essentially turned cancer treatment into a precision surgical strike. The implications were staggering. Millions of lives saved, families that wouldn't have to watch their loved ones waste away, children who'd grow up with grandparents instead of just photographs. How soon before we can start human trials? Asked Dr. Patricia Wong, our new head of medical ethics. Patricia was one of those people who'd been blacklisted from the industry for having the audacity to suggest that maybe, just maybe, medical research should prioritize saving lives over maximizing profits. FDA fast-tracked approval came through yesterday. Sophia replied with the kind of grin that could power small cities. First patients start treatment next Monday. Next Monday. We were talking about technology that would revolutionize medicine, and it was happening next Monday. Not in 5 years, not after decades of additional research, not, maybe someday, if we're lucky. Next goddamn Monday. But the cancer breakthrough was just the appetizer. The main course came when Dr. James Park stood up to deliver his report on what he was calling Project Lazarus, our carbon capture and climate reversal initiative. The atmospheric processing models are working better than our most optimistic projections, James announced, his voice carrying the excitement of someone who'd just figured out how to save the world. The quantum-enhanced molecular manipulation can extract carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and convert it into useful materials at a rate that would reverse global warming within 15 years. 15 years. Climate scientists had been saying we had maybe 50 years to prevent catastrophic global warming, and James had just casually announced that we could reverse it in less than 2 decades. The technology was so efficient it could literally suck greenhouse gases out of the air and turn them into building materials, creating an economy based on cleaning up the planet instead of destroying it. My phone, which had become less of a communication device and more of a continuous stream of increasingly absurd offers, buzzed with another notification that made me laugh out loud. The European Union was offering to trade their entire renewable energy grid for exclusive licensing rights. China had called offering to make me an honorary citizen and throw in a few provinces for good measure. The UAE wanted to buy the entire company for what they called a number with many zeros. But the call that really got my attention came from NASA. They want to discuss something they're calling Project Starshot, my secretary had mentioned during the morning briefing. Something about quantum propulsion systems and getting to Mars in 6 weeks instead of 6 months. 6 weeks to Mars. The same journey that currently took the better part of a year, we could potentially do in the time it takes to get really good at a new hobby. Space exploration had just gone from a slow crawl to a sprint, and apparently we were the ones holding the starting gun. The really delicious part wasn't just the scientific breakthroughs, though. The really satisfying part was watching the corporate vultures who'd been circling our patent portfolio realize that we weren't playing the same game they were used to. Google is offering $18 billion for exclusive licensing, announced Marcus, my lawyer, reading from a tablet that looked like it was about to catch fire from all the incoming offers. Microsoft wanted $22 billion. Apple just submitted what they're calling a blank check with a smiley face drawn on it. $22 billion. With AB, we were talking about enough money to fund small countries, solve global hunger, or buy Twitter and turn it into something useful. But every single offer got the same response from me. Not interested, I said, leaning back in Henry's old chair with the satisfaction of someone who'd just won a game that most people didn't even know they were playing. We don't sell revolutions. We lead them. The looks of confusion from some of the newer board members were priceless. These were people who'd spent their entire careers thinking in terms of quarterly profits and shareholder value, and they couldn't comprehend turning down billions of dollars just because it wasn't enough money. But sir, stammered Robert Chun, one of the directors who was still adjusting to the new reality, $18 billion is more money than most corporations will see in their entire existence. Robert, I said patiently, our quantum computing patents alone are worth more than the gross domestic product of most nations. The cancer treatment technology could generate trillions in revenue over the next decade. The climate reversal system is literally priceless because you can't put a price tag on saving the planet. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline where construction cranes were working around the clock to build the manufacturing facilities we'd need to scale up production. We're not just sitting on the next generation of technology. We're sitting on the next evolution of human civilization. And you want to sell that for what amounts to pocket change. The stock price was breaking records daily, climbing so fast that trading had to be halted twice just to let the computers catch up with the numbers. Financial analysts were running out of superlatives to describe what was happening. The phrase unprecedented growth had been used so often it had lost all meaning. But the sweetest moment came when the news broke about Claire's plea bargain. Your ex-wife officially pled guilty to 17 felony counts. Marcus mentioned casually, like he was discussing the weather. Wire fraud, corporate espionage, racketeering, and conspiracy. She's looking at 25 years minimum, and the judge denied bail pending sentencing. 25 years. The woman who'd spent our entire marriage undermining my work and planning my professional assassination was going to spend the next quarter century making license plates and learning why orange really wasn't her color. Henry, meanwhile, had become a cautionary tale told in business schools about the dangers of letting ego override judgment. The man who'd built his identity around being the smartest guy in the room had been completely outmaneuvered by the son-in-law he'd dismissed as worthless. As I looked around that boardroom at all the brilliant minds who'd been cast aside by the old regime, all the innovations that had been buried by corporate politics, all the world-changing technology that was finally getting the resources it deserved, I realized something important. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This had become something bigger, something that would outlast all of us and change the trajectory of human history. Standing in what used to be Henry's office, now mine, I stared out at the city skyline that had become a monument to second chances and vindicated dreams. The morning sun caught the glass facades of the new research facilities we'd built, each one representing another breakthrough that had started as a dismissed idea in some corporate boardroom where innovation went to die. On the wall behind my desk hung a sight that would have given Henry a stroke, my patents displayed right next to the original Aldrich Company charter, side by side like old friends who'd finally found their way home. The quantum stability algorithm that had started this whole revolution was framed in simple black, nothing fancy or pretentious, just the mathematical proof that sometimes the quiet guy in the corner is the one who's going to change everything. My phone buzzed with another message from the lab. Clinical trials approved for Alzheimer's treatment. First patients ready for quantum-enhanced neural repair. I smiled, remembering all those family dinners where Henry had dismissed my work as playing with equations, while his wife nodded along like a bobblehead in a hurricane. The directors who used to roll their eyes when I spoke now stood up when I entered the room, not out of fear, but out of genuine respect for someone who'd proven that crazy ideas sometimes turn out to be brilliant ones. The wife who'd mocked my fantasy projects was now sitting in a federal prison, probably wondering how the hell her meal ticket had turned into her worst nightmare. The father-in-law who'd called my life's work worthless nonsense had faded into obscurity, forgotten by an industry that had moved light years beyond his limited imagination. And me? The quiet, underestimated husband who'd spent years being treated like an inconvenience at his own family gatherings was now leading a technological revolution that would reshape human civilization. Because sometimes the people they laugh at the loudest, dismiss the quickest, and underestimate the most completely are the ones who end up rewriting the future while everyone else is still trying to figure out what the hell just happened. Get US the owner right now, my ex-wife yelled at the country club. He doesn't belong here. Her new husband added, remove him immediately. I stood quietly. The manager smiled. Sir, how would you like to handle their family's membership? Their faces dropped. Look, I'm not saying I planned the whole thing like some kind of revenge-obsessed movie villain, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't enjoy every single second of what was about to go down. 3 years. That's how long it had been since I last set foot in the Westwood Hills Country Club, and honestly, those 3 years had been pretty damn peaceful without the constant background noise of champagne-fueled gossip and the kind of fake laughter that makes your teeth hurt just listening to it. The last time I was here, I was still married to Miranda. Well, technically married. Emotionally, I think she'd checked out somewhere around our second anniversary when she realized I wasn't going to magically transform into a trust fund baby who spent his weekends yacht shopping. But I stayed because that's what you do, right? You work on things. You try. You ignore the fact that your wife looks at you the same way most people look at expired yogurt in the back of the fridge. Then she met Todd. Todd fucking Preston. A corporate finance guy who wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent and thought owning a Rolex made him interesting. Spoiler alert, it didn't. The guy had the personality of a PowerPoint presentation and the charisma of a parking meter, but he had money, and apparently, that was Miranda's primary love language. She left me faster than you can say irreconcilable differences, and 6 months later, She was Mrs. Preston, living her best life at the very club I was now walking back into. They'd made this place their personal kingdom. Every Sunday brunch, every charity gala, every goddamn opportunity to flash their wealth like a neon sign that screamed, "Look at us. We're better than you." And honestly, good for them. I mean, if you need a country club to validate your existence, you've got bigger problems than I could ever solve. But here's the thing about Karma. She's patient, she's creative, and she's got a wicked sense of humor. I pulled into the parking lot that Sunday morning in my completely average car, wearing a navy polo that I'd bought on sale, jeans that were comfortable as hell, and loafers that had seen better days but still had some life in them. Was it club attire? Absolutely not. Did I give a single shit? Also no. I wasn't there to play golf or sip overpriced mimosas while pretending to care about the stock market. I was there for something much more satisfying than any of that country club nonsense could ever provide. Closure. Like her whole expression just collapsed in on itself, like a poorly done facelift finally giving up the ghost. It was beautiful. Truly, genuinely beautiful. She went from, "I'm living my best life," to, "Oh shit, my past just walked in wearing jeans," in about half a second. She immediately leaned toward Todd, and I could read her lips even from across the terrace. "What is he doing here?" Todd's face went through an impressive range of colors, starting at his normal spray tan orange, moving through pink, and landing solidly on the color of an undercooked steak. The guy looked like he was about to have a medical emergency, and honestly, I was kind of hoping he would. Not in a murderous way, just in a this would make the story even better way. He stood up so fast his chair actually scraped against the marble, that awful sound that makes everyone look. "You don't belong here," he barked, his voice carrying across the entire terrace because subtlety was apparently not in his vocabulary. "Security." I smiled. Not a big smile, not some villainous grin, just a small, calm, "I know something you don't know" kind of smile. "Good morning to you too," I said pleasantly, because nothing pisses off angry people more than someone being polite when they're losing their minds. The waiter who'd been pouring coffee at the next table literally froze mid-pour, the stream of coffee hanging in the air for a second like he'd been hit with a pause button. Every member on that terrace turned to look. You could practically smell the scandal in the air, mixing with the overpriced cologne and the scent of fresh croissants. And that's when Miranda, in all her designer-dressed glory, made her grand declaration. She stood up too, because apparently, this was now a standing argument, and pointed at me like I was some kind of intruder who'd crawled in through a window. "Get us the owner right now," she demanded, her voice shrill enough to shatter those fancy chandeliers. "He doesn't belong here." I stayed quiet. I learned a long time ago that when people are digging their own graves, you don't grab the shovel and help them. You just stand back, maybe get some popcorn, and watch the show. Let the loud ones tire themselves out. Let them make all the noise, all the demands, all the self-righteous proclamations about who belongs where and who has the right to exist in their precious spaces. Because here's what Miranda didn't know. What Todd didn't know. What none of those smug, self-satisfied members sipping their champagne and judging everyone's net worth didn't know. I wasn't there as a guest. I wasn't crashing their precious brunch or trying to win back my ex-wife or make some pathetic plea for acceptance into their little rich people club. I was there as the owner. The actual, legal, documented owner of the entire goddamn place. The guy who signed their paychecks. The person who decided whether that terrace got renovated or torn down. The man who could, with a single phone call, turn their social fortress into a parking lot if he felt like it. But I wasn't going to tell them that. Not yet. Because the look on their faces when they found out, that was going to be worth every single day of the 3 years I'd spent away from this place, working my ass off, building something real while they sipped champagne and pretended their memberships made them important. So I stood there, hands in my pockets, calm as Sunday morning, and waited for the owner they demanded to show up. And when she did, Patricia Lang, the club manager who knew exactly who I was and exactly why I was there. I could barely contain the smile that was threatening to break across my face. This was going to be good. Okay, so before I get into the absolutely delicious part where Miranda and Todd realize they've royally screwed themselves, you need to understand how I ended up owning the place where my ex-wife plays pretend socialite. Because trust me, this didn't happen by accident. This was years in the making, and it all started with the slowest, most painful divorce since Henry VIII decided collecting wives was his new hobby. 3 years earlier, I was that guy. You know the one, the reliable husband. The boring one. The one who showed up, did his job, paid the bills, and apparently committed the cardinal sin of not being exciting enough for a woman who thought adventure meant shopping at a different boutique than usual. Miranda liked to call me reliable the way other people say tumor or jury duty. Like it was some kind of character flaw that I actually showed up when I said I would and didn't blow our savings on a sports car I couldn't afford. You're just so steady, she'd say, and I swear to God, the way she said steady made it sound like I'd personally offended her ancestors. Like being dependable was somehow worse than being a train wreck. And maybe in her world, it was. Because in Miranda's universe, drama equaled passion, and stability equaled boredom, and God forbid you be married to someone who didn't create chaos wherever they went. While she was playing socialite, and let me tell you, that woman could turn a simple lunch into a 3-act performance complete with costume changes. I was working my ass off. 60-hour weeks, sometimes more. I was in property management back then, which sounds boring as hell until you realize it's actually fascinating in a how much can possibly go wrong with a building kind of way. I specialized in failing estates and old hotels, the kind of properties that looked like they'd been abandoned since the Reagan administration and smelled like a combination of mold, regret, and expired dreams. But here's the thing about those properties. They had potential. Underneath all that decay and neglect, there was something worth saving. You just had to have the patience to see it through, to put in the work when everyone else had given up. Kind of like my marriage, actually, except the buildings were more grateful for the effort. I'd find these places that everyone else had written off, these gorgeous old structures that just needed someone to believe in them again, and I'd bring them back to life. New plumbing, updated electrical, restored facades, the works. It was hard, thankless work that had you coming home smelling like dust and desperation. But man, when you saw that finished product, when you saw what something could become with the right attention and investment, that was worth every grueling hour. Miranda didn't see it that way, obviously. She saw a husband who came home tired, who smelled like construction sites, who didn't have the energy to attend every single social event she deemed mandatory for our image. Never mind that I was building something real. Never mind that every project I completed added to our net worth and our future security. No, what mattered was that I wasn't exciting. I wasn't spontaneous. I wasn't Todd fucking Preston with his private jet and his inability to have a single original thought. The company I worked for hit a rough patch in our 5th year of marriage. Not a disaster, not bankruptcy, just a rough patch. The kind of thing that happens in business when you're making long-term investments instead of chasing quick profits. We had capital tied up in projects that hadn't paid off yet. And yeah, my paychecks got a little smaller for a while. We had to budget, cut back on some of the unnecessary expenses. You know, act like normal people instead of pretending we were auditioning for a reality show about the rich and shameless. Miranda acted like I'd personally bankrupted us and murdered her dreams in the process. I can't be married to someone who doesn't have direction, she announced one evening over dinner, like she was reading from a script she'd rehearsed. Direction. That was rich coming from someone whose biggest accomplishment that year was getting on the planning committee for a charity gala where she spent more on her dress than the event raised for actual charity. I should have seen it coming, honestly. The signs were all there. The way she'd started mentioning Todd's name more often. Todd said the market is shifting. Todd just bought a house in the Hamptons. Todd thinks we should diversify our portfolio. Lady, we don't have a portfolio to diversify. We have a checking account and a mortgage. Calm down. But I was too busy trying to save our marriage and build my career to notice that she'd already mentally moved on. She'd upgraded me in her head before she'd even filed the papers. I was the old model, the reliable sedan that got you from point A to point B, but didn't turn any heads. Todd was the shiny new sports car that made cool sounds and impressed her friends. Never mind that he had the depth of a parking lot puddle. 2 months after she left, she was on Todd's private jet to Maui. 2 months. I'd barely finished processing the divorce papers, and she was already posting Instagram photos with captions like, "New adventures with my forever love," and "Finally found my person." I wanted to comment, "Your person has the personality of a tax form," but I'm petty, not stupid. Social media feuds are for people with too much time and too little dignity. I signed the papers quietly. Didn't fight, didn't argue, Didn't try to take her to the cleaners the way she probably expected. I gave her the house, that overpriced suburban McMansion she'd insisted we buy because it had the right address, and I walked away. She thought she'd won. She thought she'd upgraded. She'd traded reliable for rich, boring for exciting, steady for spectacular. What Miranda didn't know, what she couldn't have known because she never actually paid attention to what I did for work, was that the rough patch my company hit wasn't a failure. It was an investment phase. The kind of strategic move you make when you're playing the long game instead of chasing immediate gratification. We were tying up capital and properties that would pay off big in a few years, but you had to have the vision and the patience to wait it out. Patience, that thing I had in spades and Miranda had never heard of. While the divorce was being finalized, while she was picking out china patterns with Todd and planning their wedding at, you guessed it, the Westwood Hills Country Club, I was making moves. Quiet moves. The kind that don't make for good Instagram posts, but make for excellent bank statements down the line. See, that's the thing about being underestimated. That's the beautiful, ironic gift that Miranda gave me when she left. She thought I was going nowhere, that I'd peaked at reliable property manager who smells like drywall. And that assumption meant she stopped paying attention. She stopped watching. She stopped caring what I was doing with my life because in her mind, I was already irrelevant. And when people think you're irrelevant, that's when you can make your best moves. That's when you can build an empire while they're busy posting selfies and congratulating themselves on escaping before you drag them down. The rough patch ended. The investments paid off. The properties we'd been nursing back to health started generating serious revenue. And I took my cut of those profits, added them to my divorce settlement savings. Yeah, I actually saved money during my divorce because I'm apparently a masochist who can't stop being responsible even when my life is falling apart. And I started looking at opportunities. Big opportunities. The kind that required partners, capital, and the kind of vision that sees potential where everyone else sees problems. The kind of opportunity that would let me buy the very country club where my ex-wife had just become a member. After the divorce, I did what any rational person does when their life implodes. I disappeared. Not literally, obviously. I didn't fake my death or move to Costa Rica or join a monastery. Though honestly, the monastery thing had some appeal during the particularly rough nights when I was eating cereal for dinner and wondering where everything went wrong. No, I disappeared professionally. Socially. I went off the grid in that way where people stop seeing you at the usual places, stop hearing your name in conversations, and eventually just assume you've faded into whatever obscurity failed husbands fade into. I deleted my social media accounts. All of them. Facebook, Instagram, that LinkedIn profile where I'd posted exactly twice, and both times it was because someone told me I had to build my brand. You know what builds your brand? Actually doing shit, not posting inspirational quotes over pictures of sunrises. I cut off contact with the mutual friends Miranda and I had shared, which wasn't a huge loss considering most of them were her friends who tolerated me the way you tolerate your friend's boring boyfriend at parties. I stopped going to the places we used to frequent, stopped showing up at the networking events and charity galas, where people measured your worth by your watch and your zip code. I became a ghost. And let me tell you, being a ghost is incredibly freeing when you've spent years trying to be visible to someone who was always looking past you anyway. But here's the thing about going off the grid. I wasn't hiding. I was building. There's a difference between running away and making a strategic retreat, and I was definitely in the latter category. I took my savings, which was decent thanks to years of being the boring guy who actually saved money instead of blowing it on bottle service and cars that depreciated faster than Miranda's interest in our marriage. I looked at that bank account and I thought, okay, you've got one shot here. You can play it safe, get a normal job, live a normal life, and die a normal death. Or you can bet on yourself. Spoiler alert, I bet on myself. And unlike Miranda's bet on Todd, mine actually paid off. I reached out to two guys I'd worked with in property management, Marcus Chun and David Rodriguez. These weren't just colleagues. These were the guys who'd been in the trenches with me, who understood that real wealth wasn't built at country clubs. It was built in the unglamorous work of turning broken things into valuable things. Marcus was a financial wizard who could look at a balance sheet and see opportunities where everyone else saw red ink. David was a construction genius who could walk through a condemned building and tell you exactly what it needed to become profitable. We met at a dive bar, because of course we did, This isn't a movie where people make business deals in fancy restaurants with cloth napkins, and I laid out my pitch. We start our own company. We specialize in distressed leisure properties. Hotels, resorts, country clubs, places that are failing because they're mismanaged, outdated, or owned by people who stopped caring. We buy them cheap, fix them up, and either flip them or run them ourselves. Marcus looked at me like I'd suggested we start a circus. Leisure properties? Do you know how many of those fail? Exactly, I said. Which is why we can buy them for pennies on the dollar. Everyone's scared of them. Everyone thinks they're money pits. But they're only money pits if you don't know what you're doing. David was more optimistic, probably because he was already mentally renovating hypothetical buildings in his head. What's the startup capital? I told them what I had. Marcus whistled low. That's not nothing. But it's not by a hotel money either. It's by a struggling property with motivated sellers' money. I countered. We find places that are underwater, where the owners are desperate to get out. We offer them an exit strategy. We take on the debt. We take on the risk, and we do the work everyone else is too lazy or too scared to do. There was a long pause where they both just stared at me, and I could see them doing the mental math. Could this actually work? Was I crazy? Was this going to be a spectacular failure that they'd tell stories about years later while working for someone else? Finally, Marcus grinned. Fuck it. I'm in. David raised his beer. Harrison Hospitality Group? Has a nice ring to it, I agreed. And just like that, over cheap beer and bar peanuts, we started something real. Something that didn't exist to impress anyone or look good on Instagram or make ex-wives jealous. We started it because we saw an opportunity and we had the balls to take it. The first few months were brutal, I'm not gonna lie. We were working out of David's garage because office space is for people with money, and we were definitely not those people yet. We spent our days cold calling property owners, analyzing financial statements, and touring buildings that looked like they'd been used as sets in post-apocalyptic movies. We saw mold that probably had its own ecosystem. We saw electrical systems that were fire hazards waiting for a spark. We saw pools that had turned into swamps and ballrooms that smelled like something had died in them, which, in one memorable case, something actually had. But we also saw potential. We saw what these places could be with the right investment, the right management, the right vision. And more importantly, we saw sellers who were motivated as hell. People who'd inherited properties they didn't want. Investors who'd gotten in over their heads. Companies that had expanded too fast and needed to shed assets before they went under completely. Our first acquisition was a small boutique hotel in upstate New York that was hemorrhaging money. The owner was 3 months from bankruptcy and would have sold it to a lamp if the lamp had offered cash. We bought it for basically the cost of the land, took out a loan for renovations, and spent 6 months gutting and rebuilding the entire operation. New management, new branding, updated rooms, actually competent staff, revolutionary concepts, I know. 18 months later, we sold it for 3 times what we paid. That money, not because I was hiding anything illegal, just because I'm not an idiot, and I knew Miranda would have made it her personal mission to sabotage the deal if she'd known I was involved. So while she was attending her charity luncheons and sipping champagne and probably talking shit about her boring ex-husband who'd never amounted to anything, I was signing paychecks for the staff who served her. I was approving the renovations that improved her beloved club. I was the invisible hand that made her social fortress actually function. And she had absolutely no idea. So there I was, standing on the terrace of my own damn country club, watching my ex-wife have what appeared to be a minor stroke, while her new husband turned colors that don't exist in nature. Which, to be fair, in her world was probably anyone who made less than 7 figures annually. She spotted me about 3 seconds after Miranda did, and her reaction was almost as good. Her hand went to her pearl necklace. Because of course it did, because that's what women like Loretta do when confronted with anything that disrupts their carefully constructed reality. And she actually gasped. Like, audibly gasped. Like she was a Victorian lady who'd just witnessed someone use the wrong fork. Oh Lord, it's him, she hissed, loud enough for half the terrace to hear. How did he even get past the gate? I pulled out a chair at a nearby empty table, not at theirs because I'm petty, but I'm not rude, and sat down with the kind of casual confidence that comes from knowing you're about to ruin someone's entire day. Public road, I said pleasantly, giving her my best smile. You'd be surprised how democracy works, Loretta. Anyone can drive down a public road. Wild concept, I know. Her face did this thing where it tried to look offended but couldn't quite manage it because Botox had robbed her of most facial expressions. This is a private club, she managed. Sure is, I agreed. Beautiful place. Love what they've done with it recently. Really turned it around. Todd slammed his napkin down on the table hard enough that his water glass jumped. The man was practically vibrating with rage, and I wondered briefly if he was going to have an aneurysm right there on the terrace. That would be awkward to explain to the insurance company. Manager, he bellowed, standing up and scanning the terrace like he was summoning a servant in a period drama. Members at other tables were definitely watching now. This was better entertainment than anything they'd get at the club's movie night. I could see phones being discreetly pulled out, probably texting their friends about the drama unfolding at the Preston table. In a place like this, gossip was currency, and I'd just handed everyone a jackpot. Miranda stood up too, because apparently this confrontation required everyone to be on their feet. Her face had gone from shocked white to angry red, and her voice had that shrill quality that I remembered all too well from our marriage. He's not a member. He has no business being here. Strong stance, I said. Examining my fingernails like this was all mildly boring. Really committing to it. I respect that. This isn't a joke, she snapped. You're trespassing. Am I though? I tilted my head, genuinely curious to see how far she'd take this before reality crashed down on her designer-clad shoulders. I mean, define trespassing. Because I'm pretty sure trespassing requires being somewhere you're not allowed to be, and I'm feeling pretty allowed right now. Todd's face was now somewhere between burgundy and eggplant. You divorced her. You have no connection to this club. You have no right to be here. Well, when you put it that way, I said thoughtfully, you make some interesting points. Wrong points, but interesting. Loretta clutched her pearls harder, if that was even possible. I was starting to worry she might actually break the strand, and we'd have the whole dramatic pearls rolling across the floor moment. Patricia, she called out, her voice dripping with that entitled tone that suggested she'd never been told no in her entire life. Patricia Lang, we need you immediately. I settled back in my chair, perfectly comfortable, perfectly calm. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, and I was going to savor every single second of it. The other members were absolutely riveted now. Some had stopped even pretending to eat, their forks frozen halfway to their mouths. A couple in the corner had their phones out, definitely recording. This was going to be all over the club's group chat within minutes. Patricia Lang appeared from inside, walking with that measured pace of someone who knew exactly what was happening and was thoroughly enjoying it. Patricia was in her 50s, professional as hell, and had been running the day-to-day operations of the club since before Miranda and Todd were even members. When we'd acquired the place, she'd been one of the first people I'd met with, and she'd been genuinely excited about our plans to actually invest in improvements instead of just milking the membership fees. She'd also thought it was hilarious that I was Miranda's ex-husband, and had kept that secret like her life depended on it. Yes, Mr. Preston? Patricia asked, her tone perfectly neutral, but I could see the amusement dancing in her eyes. Todd pointed at me like I was a piece of trash that had blown onto the terrace. This man is trespassing. Remove him immediately. Miranda jumped in, her voice getting higher and more frantic. He's not a member. He's my ex-husband, and he has no business being here. This is harassment. Harassment seems strong, I interjected. I'm literally just sitting here. I haven't even ordered coffee yet. You're ruining our brunch. Miranda shrieked. Your brunch was ruined the moment you decided to make a scene, I pointed out. I was just going to sit here quietly and maybe get some eggs Benedict. This whole drama thing, that's all you guys. Patricia turned to me, and I could see she was struggling not to smile. Sir, are you a guest of a member? This was it. This was the moment. I let the pause hang there for just a beat longer than necessary, watching Miranda's face cycle through emotions like a slot machine. Watching Todd's complexion continue its journey through the color spectrum. Watching Loretta grip those pearls like they were the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. In a way, I said casually, like I was discussing the weather. I own the place. The silence that followed was so complete, so absolute. You could have heard a credit card decline from across the lawn. Even the birds seemed to shut up. The universe itself seemed to pause, waiting to see what would happen next. Todd laughed. Actually laughed, but it was that nervous, high-pitched laugh that people do when they're hoping something is a joke, but starting to suspect it isn't. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, I said. Bought it 8 months ago. Been meaning to drop by more often, but you know how it is. Busy owning multiple properties, running a successful business, living my best life. The usual boring stuff. Miranda's mouth opened and closed like a fish. No sound came out. It was beautiful. Patricia turned to Todd, and now she wasn't even trying to hide her smile. He is, actually. Mr. Harrison is the principal owner of Harrison Hospitality Group, which acquired Westwood Hills Country Club last October. She paused, then looked back at me. Sir, how would you like to handle their family's membership? And just like that, the power dynamic shifted so completely that I could physically see Todd and Miranda process it. They went from righteous and demanding to pale and panicked in about 3 seconds flat. Todd's burgundy face drained to white. Miranda actually swayed on her feet. Loretta looked like she might actually faint, which would have been dramatic but also would have required me to help, and I really didn't want to do that. You? Miranda whispered, her voice barely audible. You own the club? Yeah. Surprise. I smiled at her, the kind of smile that said everything I'd wanted to say for 3 years but had been too classy to actually voice. Should have paid more attention to what I was doing instead of assuming I'd amount to nothing. Professional tip for next time. The entire terrace was dead silent, everyone waiting to see what I'd do next. And honestly, I was kind of waiting to see what I'd do next too. Chapter 5. Remove him immediately. Patricia stood there like a referee at the world's most satisfying boxing match, waiting for me to make the call. The entire terrace had gone from casual Sunday brunch to must-see TV in about 30 seconds, and I was absolutely here for it. This was the kind of moment you dream about during those long, lonely nights after your divorce when you're eating ramen and wondering if karma actually exists or if it's just something people say to make themselves feel better about getting screwed over. Turns out, karma is real. She just takes her sweet time showing up. Todd recovered first, probably because he'd spent his entire career bullshitting his way through corporate presentations, and this was just another performance for him. He straightened his designer tie, because of course he was wearing a tie to Sunday brunch. The guy probably wore a suit to the beach, and tried to laugh it off. You can't be serious. You bought this club? Yep, I said, popping the P sound because I'm mature like that. Signed the papers 8 months ago. Been improving it ever since. You're welcome, by the way. That new espresso machine in the cafe? My idea. The upgraded pool heating system? Also me. The fact that the staff actually gets paid a living wage now? Yeah, that was kind of a priority. Miranda's hands were shaking. Like, visibly trembling. Her voice came out strangled, like someone was squeezing her throat. You've owned this place, while we've been members? Yeah. Funny how that works out, isn't it? I leaned back in my chair, getting comfortable. I've been signing off on your membership renewals, approving the catering for your little charity events, reading the comment cards you leave at the front desk. You left one last month, actually. Something about the water temperature in the pool? We fixed that. Todd's face was doing that color-changing thing again, cycling back to red. This is absurd. You can't just buy a country club. Apparently, I can. I replied, examining my nails like this conversation was mildly boring instead of the highlight of my entire year. And judging by the quarterly reports, I did it pretty well. Revenue's up 23%, member satisfaction is at an all-time high, and we're actually turning a profit now. Wild what happens when you treat a business like a business instead of your personal playground. Loretta finally found her voice, which had gone up about 3 octaves. Patricia, surely there are rules about this. He can't just waltz in here and claim ownership. Patricia pulled out her tablet. She always had that thing with her, God bless her organized soul, and swiped through a few screens. Actually, Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Harrison's ownership is fully documented and legal. Would you like me to show you the acquisition paperwork? No. Miranda practically shouted, then seemed to realize how loud she was and lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. No, that won't be necessary. Cool, I said. Patricia, would you mind pulling up the Preston family's membership contract? I'd like to review it. I watched Todd's Adam's apple bob as he swallowed hard. Miranda went even paler, which I didn't think was physically possible. She looked like she might actually pass out, and part of me kind of hoped she would because that would make this story even better when I told it later. Patricia nodded, completely professional, though I could see she was eating this up. She'd dealt with the Preston family's entitled attitude for years, and now she got to watch them squirm. The Preston family membership, she read from her tablet, her voice clear enough for everyone on the terrace to hear. Active since 2016. Annual dues $42,000. Subject to termination for conduct unbecoming or behavior detrimental to club reputation. The silence was so thick you could have cut it with one of those overpriced steak knives they used here. Todd's voice cracked slightly. You wouldn't dare. I looked at him, really looked at him, this corporate peacock who'd swooped in and taken my wife because he had a bigger bank account and shinier toys. This guy who thought cufflinks made him intelligent and money made him important. This guy who'd probably never worked an honest day in his life, who'd never had to actually build something from nothing, who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. Actually, Todd, I said, my voice calm and steady, I would. You just try to have the owner kicked out of his own property. You called security on me. You demanded I be removed. You made a scene in front of every member here, disrupted their peaceful Sunday brunch, and generally acted like an entitled jackass. That seems fairly unbecoming, wouldn't you say? Miranda grabbed Todd's arm. He's bluffing. He wouldn't actually. Oh, I absolutely would, I interrupted. Patricia? She stood at attention, waiting. This woman deserved a raise. Hell, she deserved a medal. Effective immediately, I said, taking my time with each word, savoring them like fine wine. The Preston family's membership is suspended for 60 days pending review of their conduct and whether they represent the kind of members we want at Westwood Hills. You know that sound a balloon makes when all the air suddenly rushes out. That's basically what happened to Miranda right then. She deflated completely, her whole body seeming to shrink. You're punishing us because of what? Because of your clothes? Because we thought you didn't belong here. Not at all, I said, standing up now because this moment deserved to be delivered on my feet. I'm punishing you because you opened your mouth before using your brain. You made assumptions. You were rude, entitled, and frankly embarrassing to watch. This club has standards, Miranda. Standards you've apparently forgotten in your rush to feel superior to everyone around you. A few members actually clapped. Quiet, polite golf claps, but still, you could see the relief on some of their faces. Apparently, the Preston family wasn't exactly beloved around here. Who knew? Todd tried one last time, his voice desperate now. You'll regret this. Maybe. I shrugged, picking up the menu because honestly, I was getting hungry. But I'll do it while sitting in your usual corner booth, drinking coffee that I own, in a building that has my name on the deed. So, you know, I think I'll survive the regret. Patricia escorted them out, their perfect Sunday ruined, their social standing demolished, their membership suspended. As they walked away, Loretta still clutching those damn pearls, I finally ordered my coffee. Best cup I ever had. Miranda stood there blinking like someone had just slapped her with a reality check, her mouth opening and closing while her brain tried to process what I'd just said. The mascara she probably spent 45 minutes applying was starting to run slightly at the corners, and honestly, it was the most human she'd looked in years. Turns out public humiliation is a hell of a makeup remover. You? She managed to get out, her voice trembling somewhere between disbelief and rage. You bought the club? You. Me. I confirmed, sipping the water that had been sitting at my table. Is this really that hard to comprehend? I mean, I know you thought I was going nowhere, but damn, Miranda, I've owned the place for 8 months. You've been here like every week. How did you not notice? How was I supposed to know? She shot back, her voice getting shrill again. That pitch that used to make me want to stick forks in my ears during our marriage. You never told me. Why would I tell you? I asked reasonably. We're divorced. We don't have kids. We don't have shared assets. You made it pretty clear you wanted nothing to do with my boring, directionless life. So I gave you what you wanted, complete absence of me from your world. You're welcome. Todd, who'd been silent for a solid 30 seconds, which might have been a personal record for him, finally found his voice. This is vindictive. You bought this place just to get back at us. I actually laughed at that. Like, genuinely laughed, because the ego on this guy was something else. Oh, Todd, buddy, no. I bought this place because it was a solid investment opportunity. A distressed property in a premium location with motivated sellers and huge upside potential. The fact that my ex-wife and her new husband had made it their social headquarters? That was just the universe's way of saying, hey, good job, here's a bonus. I don't believe you, Miranda said. but her voice had lost its conviction. She was starting to realize that this was real, that this was actually happening, that her boring ex-husband had somehow managed to buy the very place she'd been using as proof of her upgraded life. "Don't have to believe me," I said with a shrug. "Belief is optional. Reality isn't. Patricia, you want to fill them in on the details?" Patricia stepped forward, still maintaining that professional demeanor even though I knew she was dying inside with how good this was. Harrison Hospitality Group acquired Westwood Hills Country Club on October 15th of last year through a competitive bidding process. The sale was finalized on November 3rd. Mr. Harrison and his partners have since invested approximately $2.3 million in property improvements, staff compensation increases, and operational upgrades. $2.3 million, I added helpfully. That's roughly 55 years' worth of your annual membership dues, Todd. Just for context. His face went through another color transition. I was starting to worry about his blood pressure. "You can't just," he started, then stopped, because I think even he realized how stupid he was about to sound. "Can't just what? Invest in my own property? Run a successful business? Exist in a space you decided was yours?" I leaned forward slightly. "Here's the thing, Todd. You don't own this place. You never own this place. You're a member, a customer. And right now, you're a customer who just tried to have the owner thrown out. That's not great business sense, my guy." Loretta had been silent this entire time, which was probably a first for her. She looked like she was having some kind of internal crisis, her worldview crumbling around her like cheap drywall. But you were in property management," she said weakly, as if that somehow made this impossible. "Still am," I said. "Just manage my own properties now instead of someone else's. Turns out, when you actually know what you're doing and you're willing to put in the work, you can build something pretty substantial." Revolutionary concept, I know. Miranda's hands were shaking worse now. "You've been watching us? This whole time? Watching? No, that would be creepy. Owning the business where you happen to be a member? That's just capitalism, baby." I stood up because I felt like this moment deserved me being on my feet. "I haven't been watching you, Miranda. I've been building a life. A successful one. The kind of life you said I'd never have because I lacked direction." She flinched at that, and I saw recognition flash across her face. She remembered saying that. Of course she did. "Well," I continued, "turns out I had plenty of direction. I just wasn't sharing the GPS coordinates with you. And now here we are. Me owning a multi-million-dollar property. You standing on my terrace having a meltdown because you can't handle the fact that the guy you discarded like yesterday's trash actually made something of himself." "This isn't fair," she whispered. "Fair?" I couldn't help but laugh. "You left me when things got hard. You married a guy with more money than personality. You spent 3 years rubbing your upgrade in everyone's face, including mine through mutual friends who couldn't wait to tell me how much better you were doing. And now you're mad because I succeeded without you? That's not unfair, Miranda. That's just you realizing you made a bad bet. Todd tried to salvage something, anything. We could sue. For emotional distress, or..." "Go ahead," I said cheerfully. "My lawyers would love that. They get bored with the easy stuff. A frivolous lawsuit from a suspended member would really make their day. Plus, discovery would be fun. We'd get to dig into all your finances, your behavior here at the club, every complaint that's been filed about you. And trust me, there have been complaints." Patricia nodded. "Several, actually." Todd's face somehow went even redder. Miranda looked like she might actually cry, which almost made me feel bad. But then I remembered 5 years of being made to feel inadequate, of being treated like an embarrassment, of being left when things got tough. Yeah, I didn't feel that bad. "So here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You're going to leave. Patricia's going to send you a formal letter about your suspension. You're going to spend the next 60 days thinking real hard about whether you want to be members here when your behavior is going to be under a microscope. And I'm going to sit here, have my coffee, maybe some Eggs Benedict, and enjoy my Sunday." Miranda opened her mouth one more time. "I can't believe you're doing this." "I can't believe it took me this long," I replied. "Now if you'll excuse me, I've got a club to run." And with that, they left. Finally, the show was over. By the time I made it to my car, my phone was already going absolutely insane. I'm talking full-blown digital meltdown. Buzz, 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 like I'd kicked a hornet's nest made entirely of notifications. I didn't even have to look to know who it was. But I looked anyway because I'm only human, and watching someone spiral via text message is honestly its own form of entertainment. Miranda. Of course it was Miranda. The first text came through at 11:47 a.m., exactly 12 minutes after she'd been escorted off the terrace like someone who'd had too much wine and started a fight at a wedding. You humiliated me in front of everyone. No hi. No can we talk. Just straight to the victim narrative. Classic Miranda. Take no responsibility, claim maximum damage, make it all about how she'd been wronged. I almost responded with, you humiliated yourself, I just watched, but decided to let her keep going. This was clearly going to be a marathon, not a sprint. 11:48 a.m. You've ruined our reputation. Our reputation. Like she and Todd were some kind of power couple whose social standing mattered to anyone outside their little bubble of country club narcissism. Lady, your reputation was that you were high-maintenance snobs who treated the staff like furniture. I didn't ruin anything. I just held up a mirror. 11:49 a.m. How could you be so petty? There it was. The word I'd been waiting for. Petty. Because standing up for yourself after being treated like garbage is apparently petty. Because buying a business and running it successfully is petty. Because not letting people walk all over you in your own establishment is petty. Sure, Miranda. I'm the petty one here. 11:51 a.m. Todd is livid. He wants to talk to you. Oh, I'm sure he does. I'm sure Todd would love to have a little man-to-man conversation where he tries to intimidate me or buy me off, or whatever corporate finance bros do when they don't get their way. Pass. 11:53 a.m. You can't just kick us out. We have rights. Rights. In all caps. Because nothing says, I'm losing an argument, quite like random capitalization. Yeah, you have rights. You have the right to be treated according to the membership agreement you signed, which includes a clause about conduct that you definitely violated. You also have the right to remain silent, which I highly recommend you exercise. I waited until I was in my car, engine running, air conditioning blasting away the late morning heat, before I responded. Just one line. Clean, simple, devastating. Dress code violation. You know how it is. I could practically hear her screaming through the phone. It was beautiful. The drive home took about 20 minutes, and my phone didn't stop buzzing the entire time. I ignored it. Let her vent into the void. Let her fill up my text messages with her outrage and her disbelief and her wounded pride. I'd read them later when I had a drink in my hand and could fully appreciate the poetry of someone who'd spent years making me feel small now experiencing what it felt like to be on the other side of that equation. When I got home, to my modest but paid-off condo that didn't require a country club membership to validate its worth, I poured myself 3 fingers of bourbon. The good stuff. The bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion, and brother, this qualified. I sat down on my couch, put my feet up on the coffee table, and finally scrolled through the damage. 23 texts from Miranda. 23. Each one more desperate and angry than the last. They progressed through the 5 stages of grief in record time. Denial. This isn't real. Anger. You're a vindictive asshole. Bargaining. Can we please just talk about this like adults? Depression. I can't believe you do this to me. And finally, acceptance. Fine. You win. Are you happy now? Was I happy? That was the question, wasn't it? I took a sip of bourbon and thought about it. Really thought about it. 3 years ago, I'd signed divorce papers feeling like a failure. Like I hadn't been enough, hadn't done enough, hadn't been exciting or successful or interesting enough to keep my wife interested. I'd gone through months of questioning everything about myself, wondering what was wrong with me, why I wasn't good enough. And now here I sat, owner of multiple properties, running a successful business, having just suspended my ex-wife's country club membership in front of her entire social circle, and she was asking if I was happy. Yeah, I was pretty fucking happy. I didn't respond to her texts. What was there to say? Nothing I could text would hit as hard as what had already happened. Sometimes silence is the loudest response. Instead, I called Marcus and David, my business partners who'd been with me through the whole journey. They picked up on a 3-way call, and I didn't even have to say anything before Marcus was laughing. Bro, Patricia already called us, he said. Said you handled it perfectly. Patricia called you? I asked. Are you kidding? She was dying to tell someone. Said it was the most professional savage move she'd seen in 20 years of club management. David chimed in. She also said half the members want to buy you a drink and the other half are terrified you're going to suspend them next. Good, I said. Little bit of fear keeps people honest. So how does it feel? Marcus asked. The big revenge moment. Was it everything you dreamed? I swirled the bourbon in my glass, watching the light catch the amber liquid. Honestly, it wasn't revenge. Revenge would have been buying the place just to kick them out. This was just consequences. They were rude to the owner. I responded appropriately. That's just business. Business with a side of poetic justice, David added. Maybe, I admitted. But mostly just business. We talked for another hour, going over some other properties we were looking at, discussing expansion plans, the usual work stuff. Normal life. Successful life. The kind of life I'd built while Miranda was busy posting Instagram photos of champagne brunches and Caribbean vacations. When I hung up, I looked at my phone one more time. 2 new texts from Miranda. We need to talk about this like adults. Please. That please sitting there all alone in its own text message. Small. Vulnerable. The way I'd felt so many times during our marriage when I was trying to get her to see me, to value me, to treat our relationship like it mattered. I thought about responding. Thought about being magnanimous in victory, about taking the high road, about showing her I was the bigger person. Then I remembered every time she'd made me feel inadequate, every subtle put down, every time she'd looked at me like I was disappointing her just by existing. I turned off my phone, finished my bourbon, and smiled. Some conversations aren't worth having. Some people don't deserve your time or your explanations or your emotional labor. Sometimes the best response is living well and letting them sit with their own choices. And man, was I living well. 2 days after the great terrace meltdown of Westwood Hills. Yeah, I was calling it that now because it deserved a title. I was sitting in my home office, minding my own business, working through some renovation proposals for another property we'd just acquired, when my email dinged with the kind of professional subject line that immediately tells you someone's lawyer is about to waste everyone's time. Formal complaint. Preston Family versus Harrison Hospitality Group. I sat back in my chair and actually laughed out loud. Of course they were doing this. Because people like Miranda and Todd don't just accept consequences like normal humans. They lawyer up and try to make their problems everyone else's problems. It's like their default setting when reality doesn't align with their expectations. I opened the email and started reading, and with each paragraph, my smile got wider. This was comedy gold. This was better than anything on Netflix. This was a masterclass in how rich people think the legal system is their personal complaint department. The complaint, sent from some fancy law firm with 3 last names and probably offices in a building with a doorman, cited emotional distress and abuse of power as the primary grievances. Apparently, my decision to suspend their membership had caused Miranda severe psychological harm and had damaged their standing in the community. Todd claimed he'd suffered reputational injury and that my actions were retaliatory and vindictive in nature. Retaliatory and vindictive. Like those were bad things when someone tried to have you thrown out of your own property. The letter went on for pages. Literally 6 pages of legal jargon that could have been summarized as, "Our clients are mad that they experienced consequences for their actions. Please make the bad man apologize and give us money." They were demanding reinstatement of their membership with a formal apology, compensation for emotional damages to the tune of $50,000, because apparently that's what hurt feelings cost these days, and a guarantee that I would have no further direct contact or involvement with the Preston family's membership status. That last part really got me. They wanted me to own the club but not be allowed to make decisions about their membership. That's like buying a restaurant and being told you can't decide which customers to serve. The audacity was almost impressive. I forwarded the email to our legal team with a subject line that just said, LOL. Within an hour, I had 3 lawyers on a conference call, and I could hear at least 2 of them trying not to laugh. Jennifer Park, our lead attorney and a woman who'd seen every kind of frivolous lawsuit in her 20-year career, was the first to speak. Okay, so I've read through this entire complaint, and I have thoughts. Please share, I said, leaning back in my chair and putting my feet up on the desk because this was about to be entertaining. First thought, this is hilarious. Second thought, this is completely without merit. Third thought, we're going to have so much fun destroying this. She paused. Should I be concerned that I'm enjoying this as much as I am? Embrace it, I said. Life's too short not to enjoy watching entitled people learn that lawyers can't actually fix stupid. David Chun, one of our other attorneys, jumped in. I've pulled all the documentation from the incident. Security footage, witness statements from other members, Patricia's incident report, their membership contract with the behavioral clause they signed. And this is my favorite part. A complaint log showing 7 previous incidents involving the Preston family. 7. I sat up. What kind of incidents? Oh, it's good, David said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Complaints about them being rude to staff, demanding special treatment, making other members uncomfortable with loud arguments, Todd getting into a verbal altercation with another member over a parking spot. There's even one from last year where Miranda allegedly threw a drink at a waiter because her salad had the wrong dressing. She threw a drink at someone? I couldn't believe it. Actually, yes, I could. That tracked perfectly with the Miranda I knew. According to 3 witnesses, yes. The previous management gave them a warning but didn't suspend them because, and I quote, "They're high-paying members and we can't afford to lose the revenue." Well, I said, we're not the previous management, are we? Jennifer laughed. No, we are not. Okay, here's what I'm thinking. We respond with a comprehensive report documenting every single incident, every complaint, every piece of evidence showing that the suspension was not only justified but arguably should have happened sooner. We cite the behavioral clause in their membership contract that they signed. We include the security footage of them causing a scene on the terrace. And we very politely tell them that if they'd like to pursue legal action, we'll see them in court where all of this becomes public record. I love it, I said. How long will that take? Oh, we can have it done by end of day tomorrow. I'm motivated. This is the kind of case that reminds me why I went to law school, to tell rich people that money doesn't exempt them from basic human decency. You're my favorite lawyer, I told her. I know, she replied. Now, one more thing. They're claiming emotional distress. To prove that, they need to show evidence of actual psychological harm. Therapy records, doctor's notes, that kind of thing. Do you think they have any of that? I thought about Miranda's Instagram, which I checked once or twice. Okay, maybe more than twice, since the incident. She'd posted a photo yesterday of her and Todd at some restaurant, smiling and holding wine glasses, with a caption about not letting negativity bring us down. Pretty sure her social media posts showing her living her best life are going to undermine the whole severe psychological harm argument, I said. Oh my God, please tell me you screenshot those, Jennifer said. Way ahead of you. You're my favorite client. The next day, our legal team sent their response. 38 pages. 38 glorious pages of documentation, legal precedent, contractual obligations, and a very professional way of saying, your clients screwed up and are now facing consequences. Please grow up. The response included security footage of the entire terrace incident, timestamp and all, transcripts of exactly what was said by all parties, witness statements from 6 other members who were present, the behavioral clause from the membership contract, highlighted, the log of 7 previous complaints against the Preston family, documentation of similar suspensions at other clubs for similar behavior. A very detailed explanation of how property owners have the right to refuse service. Screenshots of Miranda's social media posts demonstrating she was not, in fact, suffering from severe psychological harm. My personal favorite, a copy of the club's dress code policy, with a note that I had technically violated it, which made their attempt to have me removed even more ironic since they were citing rules they themselves frequently ignored. The final paragraph was a work of art. Jennifer had written it herself, and it basically said, your clients attempted to have the property owner removed from his own establishment based on their incorrect assumption that he didn't belong there. When corrected, they responded with hostility and entitlement. The suspension stance. If you wish to pursue litigation, we welcome discovery, as it will make public record the full history of your client's behavior at our establishment. We suggest you advise your clients to accept the consequences of their actions and use this 60-day suspension period to reflect on how to conduct themselves appropriately in the future. Professional. Devastating. Perfect. I bought Jennifer a bottle of very expensive scotch. The Preston family's lawyers responded 3 days later with a much shorter email that basically amounted to, we're withdrawing the complaint. No explanation, no apology, just a terse notification that they wouldn't be pursuing legal action. I imagined their lawyers sitting them down and explaining exactly how badly this would go for them in court. I imagined Todd's face when he realized that all those previous incidents were documented and would become public record. I imagined Miranda finally understanding that throwing money at a problem doesn't work when the other side has just as much money and actual evidence. Case closed. Jennifer emailed me. Literally one of the easiest wins of my career. They took one look at our documentation and ran for the hills. Think they learned anything? I asked. Probably not, she replied. But they definitely learned not to mess with us. That night, I got one more text from Miranda. Don't know how she got my new number, but wealthy people have their ways. It was just one line. Can we talk privately? I stared at that message for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let her stew in whatever consequences she was dealing with. Part of me was curious about what she could possibly want to say now that the legal threat had failed spectacularly. I responded, sure, but we're something fancy. Wouldn't want to embarrass the owner. Petty? Absolutely. Satisfying. You have no idea. We scheduled a meeting for the following Sunday. Same place, same terrace, different power dynamic. And I was very much looking forward to it. Sunday morning rolled around with that crisp autumn air that makes everything feel like a fresh start, which was ironic considering I was about to have what would probably be the final conversation with my ex-wife. I got to the club early, before the brunch crowd descended, and sat at a table on the terrace with a view of the parking lot. Wanted to see her arrive. Wanted to watch her walk up those steps knowing that this time, she wasn't walking into her territory. She was walking into mine. She pulled up in Todd's Mercedes, because of course she was driving his car, probably some weird power move, or maybe he just didn't want to face me again. I didn't blame him. The guy had been humiliated enough for one lifetime. Miranda got out wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, heels that clicked against the pavement like a countdown timer, and sunglasses that covered half her face. The uniform of someone trying very hard to look like they have their life together. I watched her climb the terrace steps, watched her pause at the top when she saw me sitting there, coffee already ordered, looking completely at ease in my navy polo and jeans. Still not club attire, but then again, dress codes are more like suggestions when you own the place. She walked over slowly, and I could see her hands shaking slightly even from a distance. Good. She should be nervous. She should feel at least a fraction of the anxiety she'd caused me over the years. Thanks for meeting me, she said quietly, sliding into the chair across from me. Her voice was different, smaller. The bravado was gone, stripped away by 2 weeks of suspension and a failed lawsuit. Figured we should talk, I said, keeping my tone neutral. Clear the air. All that mature adult stuff people are supposed to do. She took off her sunglasses, and I saw her eyes were puffy, like she'd been crying or not sleeping or both. Part of me, a very small part, felt a twinge of something that might have been sympathy. But then I remembered 5 years of being made to feel inadequate, and that twinge evaporated pretty damn quick. You didn't have to humiliate me, she said, her voice cracking slightly. Not like that. Not in front of everyone. I took a sip of my coffee, let her words hang in the air for a second. You're right, I said finally. I didn't have to. But you spent years doing it to me, Miranda. Years of making me feel like I wasn't good enough, wasn't exciting enough, wasn't worth your time. So yeah, maybe I didn't have to humiliate you. But consider it, symmetrical therapy. She flinched. I never meant to make you feel that way. Didn't you though? I leaned forward slightly. Every time you introduced me as your husband with that apologetic tone in your voice, every time you told people I was in property management, like you were admitting I had a disease, every time you compared me to your friends' husbands and found me lacking, you absolutely meant it, Miranda. You just didn't think I was paying attention. I was unhappy, she said weakly, like that explained everything. So was I replied. Difference is, I tried to fix it. You just traded it in for a newer model. She looked down at her hands, those perfectly manicured nails that probably required weekly maintenance. I thought Todd was what I wanted. The lifestyle, the money, the excitement. And now, she laughed, but it was bitter. Now I'm married to a man who cares more about his stock portfolio than anything else. Who treats me like another asset he acquired. Who? She trailed off, shaking her head. It doesn't matter. It kind of does, I said. You left me because you thought you were upgrading. You thought reliability and steadiness were bugs, not features. You thought the grass was greener. So what happened? Did you find out that AstroTurf isn't actually better than real grass? She looked up at me, and for a second I saw the woman I'd married. Not the social climbing, status-obsessed version she'd become, but the person underneath all that. You've changed, she said softly. I had to, I replied. When someone tells you you're not good enough for 3 years straight, you have two choices. You can believe them and shrink, or you can prove them wrong and grow. I chose option B. I never said you weren't good enough. Miranda, those were literally your exact words when you left. I can't be married to someone who isn't good enough for the life I want. Don't rewrite history now that it's inconvenient. She went quiet, because she knew I was right. She'd said it. I'd heard it. We both remembered it. For what it's worth, she said after a long pause, I was wrong. About you. About what mattered. About everything, really. That's a start, I acknowledged. But it doesn't undo 3 years of damage. It doesn't erase how you made me feel. And it definitely doesn't change the fact that you tried to have me kicked out of my own property 2 weeks ago. I didn't know. You didn't ask, I interrupted. You assumed. You saw what you expected to see. Your boring ex-husband, who couldn't possibly have made something of himself, and you acted accordingly. That's on you, Miranda. That's all on you. She looked like she might cry again, and part of me felt bad about that. But the larger part of me, the part that had spent 3 years rebuilding himself from the ground up, felt like this conversation was necessary. Like lancing a wound that had been festering too long. So what now? She asked quietly. Are you going to let us back in? After the 60 days? I thought about it. Really thought about it. I could ban them permanently, could make sure they never set foot in this club again. That would be satisfying in a petty, vindictive way. Or I could let them back in, let them see me here regularly, let them live with the knowledge that they were guests in my house. That depends, I said finally. Are you going to behave like an adult? Are you going to treat the staff with respect? Are you going to remember that being a member here is a privilege, not a right? Yes, she said quickly. Yes, we will. I promise. Then we'll see. I said. The suspension stands for the full 60 days. After that, Patricia will reach out about reinstatement. But understand this. One more incident, one more complaint, one more display of the entitled bullshit that got you suspended in the first place, and you're done. Permanently. No second chances. She nodded, understanding. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, I said, standing up. You haven't earned your way back in. As I turned to leave, Todd's Mercedes pulled back into the parking lot. He must have dropped her off and circled back, too scared to actually come up to the terrace himself. Can't say I blamed him. One more thing, I said, turning back to Miranda. Being underestimated? Turns out it's a great business plan. So thanks. Thanks for leaving when things got hard. Thanks for thinking I'd never amount to anything. Thanks for giving me the motivation to prove you wrong. I walked away before she could respond, heading through the marble lobby where staff members nodded at me with respect. Not the fake respect people give to rich assholes, but real respect earned through treating them like human beings and paying them fairly. Patricia caught me at the door. How'd it go? Better than expected, I said. Might let them back in after the 60 days. You're more forgiving than I would be, she said with a smile. Not forgiveness, I corrected. Strategy. Having them here, knowing what they know now, that's better than banning them. That's a constant reminder that they bet against the wrong guy. She laughed. Remind me never to underestimate you. Smart policy, I agreed. I walked out into the morning sun, and for the first time since the divorce, I felt genuinely at peace. Not because I'd gotten revenge, though that helped, but because I'd finally proven to myself what I'd always suspected, that I was never the problem. The problem was being with someone who couldn't see my worth. Now I own that worth. Literally and figuratively. And that felt better than any victory I could have imagined. 3 weeks after my conversation with Miranda, I found myself back at the club on another Sunday morning. But this time it wasn't for drama or confrontation or any kind of revenge plot. I was actually there to work, which sounds boring as hell, but was actually pretty satisfying. Marcus and David were flying in to review our quarterly numbers and discuss potential new acquisitions, and the club had a conference room that was way nicer than our actual office. Plus, the coffee was better. Significantly better. I was sitting in the lobby going through some documents when Todd walked in. Alone this time, no Miranda clutching his arm, no entourage of country club friends to back him up. Just Todd, looking significantly less confident than the last time I'd seen him, wearing a golf outfit that probably cost more than my first car, but somehow made him look smaller rather than impressive. He saw me and froze. I watched him go through the mental calculation, turn around and leave, or actually face the guy who'd publicly demolished his ego 3 weeks ago. To his credit, he didn't run. He walked over, slowly, like a man approaching a firing squad. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice missing all that corporate peacock bravado I remembered. I looked up from my documents, taking my time. "Sure. Have a seat." He sat down across from me, and I could see he'd rehearsed this. His hands were fidgeting. He kept clearing his throat. All the signs of someone who'd practiced a speech in the mirror and was now terrified of actually delivering it. "I wanted to apologize," he said finally, "for that day on the terrace, for trying to have you removed, for everything, really." I set down my documents, giving him my full attention. "Okay, I'm listening." He took a breath. "I was a dick. There's no other way to say it. I saw you in jeans and assumed you didn't belong, and I made a scene because I wanted to look important in front of Miranda and her mother. I didn't think, I just reacted, and I was completely out of line." "You were," I agreed. "But go on. And the lawsuit thing, that was stupid. Miranda was upset and her mother was in her ear about standing up for ourselves, and I just went along with it because it was easier than telling them they were wrong." He rubbed his face. "My lawyers explained, in very small words, exactly how badly that would have gone for us." "Yeah, my lawyers enjoyed that," I said. "One of them bought a celebratory bottle of champagne." Todd actually smiled a little at that. "Look, I know you have no reason to believe me, but I am sorry. Not just because you own the place and could ban us permanently, but because it was shitty behavior and you didn't deserve it." I studied him for a moment. This wasn't the same guy who'd barked at me to leave 3 weeks ago. This was someone who'd actually been humbled, which is a rare sight among the country club set. "Apology accepted," I said. "But let me be clear, you screw up again, and I won't be nearly as understanding." "I know," he said quickly. "I get it. One strike, and we're out." "Good." I paused, then decided to throw him a bone. "For what it's worth, I didn't buy this place to screw with you and Miranda. That really was just a bonus feature." He laughed, and it sounded genuine. "Some bonus feature. Miranda's barely slept since it happened. She's been spiraling about what everyone thinks, about our reputation, about—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "About the fact that her boring ex-husband ended up more successful than she expected?" I offered. "Yeah," he admitted. "That's pretty much it. She keeps talking about how she had no idea you were capable of this, and I keep thinking, maybe she should have paid more attention." That surprised me. "You saying that to make me feel better, or do you actually mean it?" Todd looked uncomfortable. "Can I be honest with you? And this stays between us." "Sure," I said, curious now. "I think Miranda built this whole narrative about you in her head after the divorce. The failed husband, the guy who couldn't give her the life she wanted, the boring, reliable guy who'd never amount to much. And she needed that narrative to justify leaving you for me, you know? She needed you to be the wrong choice so that I could be the right one. And now that narrative's been completely destroyed," I said. "Completely obliterated," he confirmed. "And she's having a hard time reconciling the reality that you built something impressive with what she told herself about you. It's causing some issues. I shouldn't have felt satisfied hearing that, but I absolutely did." "Issues between you two?" He hesitated, then nodded. "She keeps comparing. Keeps talking about how you were when you were together versus how you are now. Keeps wondering out loud if she made a mistake." He looked at me directly. "I'm not going to lie, man. It sucks being the rebound guy who's starting to look like the downgrade." I almost felt bad for him. Almost. "Todd, I'm going to tell you something, and you can take it or leave it. Miranda left me because I wasn't exciting enough, wasn't rich enough, wasn't whatever enough to match her fantasy. But here's the thing. I was always capable of this. The potential was always there. She just couldn't see it because she was too busy looking at the surface instead of the foundation." He was quiet, processing that. "You want my advice?" I continued. "Stop trying to compete with a version of me that only exists in her head now. I'm not that guy anymore, and you're not me. Figure out what your relationship actually is instead of what she wishes it was." That's surprisingly helpful advice from someone whose life I tried to make miserable 3 weeks ago, he said. "Yeah, well, I'm full of surprises," I said. "Plus, holding grudges is exhausting, and I've got better things to do." Todd stood up, extending his hand. Thanks for not being as much of an asshole as I deserved. I shook his hand. Don't make me regret it. He left, and I went back to my documents. But I couldn't focus. The conversation had stirred up thoughts I'd been trying to avoid. Was I doing all this, the success, the club ownership, the whole trajectory of my life, to prove Miranda wrong? Or was I doing it for myself? Patricia found me 20 minutes later, still staring at the same page. You okay? She asked. You look contemplative. It's weird. Just thinking, I said, about why we do what we do. She sat down. This about the Preston situation? Kind of. Todd just apologized. Actually seemed genuine about it. Huh, she said. Character growth. Didn't see that coming. Right. I set down the documents. But it got me thinking. Did I buy this place because it was a good investment? Or because I wanted to stick it to my ex-wife? Patricia considered that. Does it have to be one or the other? What do you mean? I mean, maybe it was both. Maybe you saw a good investment opportunity and the fact that it was Miranda's social headquarters made it extra appealing. That doesn't make the business decision any less sound, and it doesn't make your success any less legitimate. She smiled. You're allowed to enjoy the irony while still being good at your job. When did you become so wise? I asked. I've been managing country clubs for 20 years. You see a lot of human nature in this job. Most of it is petty, some of it is beautiful, and all of it is entertaining if you have the right perspective. Marcus and David arrived an hour later, and we spent the afternoon going over numbers. The club was performing better than projected, membership applications were up, and we'd gotten requests from 2 other struggling clubs asking if we'd be interested in acquisition talks. Harrison Hospitality Group was officially on the map. You know what this means, right? Marcus said, grinning. We're going to need to hire more staff. Maybe get an actual office instead of working out of David's garage. The garage has character, David protested. The garage smells like paint thinner and broken dreams, Marcus countered. We can afford better now. We celebrated that night at the club's restaurant. The 3 of us plus Patricia, who'd become an unofficial 4th partner in spirit, if not in equity. Over steaks and wine that I didn't have to check the price of before ordering. We talked about the future. More acquisitions, bigger properties, maybe even franchising our management model to other clubs that needed help. It felt good. It felt earned. And most importantly, it felt like mine. Not something I was doing to prove anyone wrong, but something I was building because I was actually good at it. As the night wound down and Marcus and David headed to their hotel, I walked through the club one more time. Past the terrace where it had all gone down, through the lobby with its ridiculous chandeliers, around the grounds that we'd spent months improving. This place that had once represented everything I wasn't good enough for now represented everything I'd built. That's when I saw Miranda. She was alone, sitting on a bench near the garden, staring at nothing. She looked up when she heard my footsteps. Couldn't sleep? I asked. Something like that, she said quietly. What are you doing here so late? Had a meeting. Celebrated some good news. Just doing a final walkthrough before heading home. She nodded, then after a moment said, I saw you talking to Todd earlier. He apologized. It was surprisingly mature of him. He's been different since everything happened, she said. More thoughtful, less performative. She looked at me. You were right, you know, about the symmetrical therapy thing. I needed to feel what I made you feel. I needed to understand. And do you? I asked. Understand. I think so, she said. I treated you like you weren't enough because I wasn't enough. I was so focused on appearances and status and what everyone else thought that I couldn't see what actually mattered. And by the time I figured it out, you'd already moved on. I sat down on the bench, keeping a respectful distance between us. For what it's worth, Miranda, I don't hate you. I did for a while, but it's exhausting and ultimately pointless. You made choices, I made choices, and here we are. Here we are, she repeated. You owning the club, me suspended from it. Todd apologizing, me questioning everything. She laughed softly. Not how I thought this chapter of my life would go. Life's funny that way, I said. You think you know how the story goes, and then plot twist. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and I realized this was it. This was actual closure. Not the confrontational kind, not the revenge kind, but the quiet kind where 2 people who used to mean something to each other acknowledge that they've both moved on. I should go, I said, standing up. Got an early meeting tomorrow. Of course you do, she said with a small smile. The successful businessman with his empire to run. Something like that. I agreed. Take care of yourself, Miranda. You too, she said. And thank you for not making this worse than it had to be. I walked away, through the marble lobby one last time that night, past the staff who were cleaning up after the evening service. Patricia was still in her office, wrapping up paperwork. Heading out? She asked. Yeah, I said. Long day. Good day though, she said. We did good work here. You should be proud. I am, I said and meant it. I really am. I drove home that night with the windows down, letting the cool air clear my head. The city lights blurred past, and I thought about everything that had happened. The divorce, the rebuild, the acquisition, the confrontation, the resolution. All of it leading to this moment where I finally, genuinely felt at peace. Miranda had been wrong about me. Todd had been wrong about me. Hell, I'd probably been wrong about me for a while there. But I'd figured it out eventually. I'd learned that being underestimated isn't a curse, it's an opportunity. That steady and reliable aren't weaknesses, they're foundations. That sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just living well and building something you're proud of. The next morning, I woke up early, made coffee, and got ready for another day of work. Because that's what you do when you own multiple properties and run a growing hospitality company. You show up. You do the work. You make the boring, reliable, steady choices that compound over time into something extraordinary. And if your ex-wife happens to witness that extraordinary thing while sipping overpriced champagne at a club you own, well, that's just the cherry on top of a sundae you were going to enjoy anyway. I had closure. I had success. I had peace. And most importantly, I had proof that the quiet guy who keeps his head down and does the work, he's the one who ends up winning in the end. Game over. I won. Time to find the next challenge.